This story begins with the outer gods, who during their lives gave birth to countless universes called perfect beings. Through endless cycles of creation, they indulged in eternity, during which time they created an immense amount of matter, souls, and laws. Over time, these entities grew tired of the endless routine and came up with a new way to enjoy their allotted eternity. They decided to watch the warriors of their creations. The Itterims found the destruction of their works more exciting. Although countless creatures continued to be born and die for the sake of war, it was a necessary sacrifice to drive away boredom. However, an incident occurred. One of the gods was killed by one of his creations while watching another war. Itterims from other dimensions, having learned of this, gathered to observe the world without a god. The death of their comrade, caused by his own creations, caused a dispute among the higher gods. The entities completely ignored this fact, but they all realized something that could once again amuse them. Power without a master to the village, to the first one who gets to it. And this will be another interesting competition among creations. At the same time, on Earth, a guy who had long dreamed of getting there was accepted into Hankook University of the Arts. His friends couldn't believe it, because they knew their friend and his careless attitude toward studying. They couldn't understand how someone like Suho could be accepted into an art school, while they themselves couldn't get into anything. At that very moment, a guy approached him, who was also surprised that he had been accepted into the art school, and congratulated him on it. Lee Young-chul didn't know that this guy was so talented, but Suho reacted coldly to his congratulations. He even misspelled the name of the man who approached him, which made him very angry, but the guy didn't even notice it. Thanks to Suho, his plan to take over the school completely failed, but thanks to Young-chul, he was able to enter. The girls sitting to the side didn't understand why he was still acting like a child, since they were about to enter college soon. Moreover, Young-chul is constantly rude to the very person who is trying to get his life back on track after his parents' disappearance. At that very second, Yeon wanted to hit Suho, but he was faster and immediately aimed his knee straight at the offender's face. The guy asked with displeasure why he didn't calm down before graduation, but immediately fell silent, staring at his opponent. Even after a strong knee strike, Chol remained standing and a strange smile appeared on his face, although his nose started bleeding. He stated that he felt no pain at all, after which he swung again, wanting to catch up with the arrogant guy. The fist flew past and met with a locker, in which it was able to leave a huge hole, stunning everyone. Suho couldn't even imagine what would have happened to him if he had taken that blow on himself. 2 years later, Suho was already a sophomore, living an ordinary life that didn't foreshadow anything mysterious. Suddenly, he heard an announcement that all classes in the main building were being moved to the neighboring one. Walking down the street, the guy noticed a gate, inside which there were hunters who were supposed to clear it of monsters. He overheard that it was a D-rank gate, and the hunters had been there for a little over 8 hours. Meanwhile, people from the Hunters Association continued to ask ordinary citizens to move away, as it was dangerous. With the appearance of the gate, the world has changed greatly over the past 3 years, and no one can say where they came from or why. The gate is a passage into dungeons, from which, after a certain time, the monsters living inside break out. People also began to change, as if they had been destined to fight these monsters from the very beginning. Superhumans capable of using mana appeared. They were called Awakened, and they have been clearing the gates ever since. Everyone thought that this chaos would continue for a long time, but Woo Jin Cheol created a Hunters Association to unite them. Now the world is divided between awakened hunters and unawakened civilians. Suho thought about this while he was in class and working with a brush, not yet understanding what exactly he was drawing. While some worked like ants to earn a living, others made a fortune without lifting a finger. This difference quickly made the ants realize their limits, because when Young-chul became awakened, Suho often got into trouble with him. No matter how persistent an unawakened person is, they will never be able to compare to an E-rank awakened person, even though they are the weakest. The world will end if the hunters don't close the gates in time. Civilians won't survive without the awakened, but not the other way around. Therefore, everyone is grateful to the hunters because thanks to them, the unawakened can live on, entrusting their safety to them. However, the boy began to have doubts that he was slowly getting used to losing control over things. His parents missing, he relies on others to survive, even when it seems he can handle everything. After he had made up his mind, he was filled with a feeling of helplessness that made it difficult to do anything about it. Mom always said that he was becoming like his father, but how would he cope with this feeling? At that very moment, the teacher turned to him and noticed that the boy was very focused today. But he only drew whatever came into his head. The teacher, noticing the ant, decided that it was quite specific. After all, he looked more like a humanoid ant, and Suho didn't understand why he drew him at all. The ant in his painting looked more like a monster that was created for fighting and looked terrifying. At the same time, hunters began to emerge from the forest and were immediately met by people passing by. Yes, they noticed that the hunters looked very pleased, and it seemed that they had succeeded too. The man in the battered armor declared that the raid had been a success, but he also needed to report some news to the association. Then his face darkened as he added that they had encountered new kinds of monsters that no one had ever encountered before. Human-like monsters with blue flames pouring from their eyes and mouths try to bite and attack with their claws. Although their attacks are extremely weak, one of them caught him, but he was completely fine. He replied that they were still new monsters that nothing was known about. After this, he asked the hunter to write a short report on how the raid went. But at that very second, the wound on the hunter's leg suddenly burst into a blue flame, which made the man freeze. The two-handed sword fell from his hands, while the surprised worker did not understand what was happening. The boy tried to address him, but at that very second the hunter attacked him, opening his mouth wide, wanting to bite. Other hunters and association workers tried to understand what had just happened and why the man had attacked the worker. One of the girls noticed a blue fire, just like the monsters in the dungeon, but suddenly it attacked her too. Passers-by and workers immediately began to run away in panic, trying to get to a safe place as quickly as possible. However, some were unable to escape and were bitten by the zombie hunters who infected everyone in sight. Meanwhile, Suho's classmates began to approach the window, wondering what the noise was. When the guy approached the window, he was shocked to see people with blue eyes fighting with each other. Some compared them to monsters, while others suggested that a dungeon had broken through near them. They were deciding whether to run or stay, because they had to wait for the arrival of the hunters who were supposed to save them. One of the students asked the awakened teacher to do something, but Lim was only E rank. At that very moment, a stunned Suho noticed a hunter appear on the opposite rooftop, about to jump. The guy immediately ordered everyone to run away, but it was too late because this monster flew into their office with one jump. A couple of the students had already fallen dead, while the rest were clinging to any opportunity to escape. Suddenly, one of Suho's classmates couldn't get up because her legs couldn't support her anymore due to fear. She asked the guy to help, but he replied that he would call the hunters, after which he rushed to the exit. But he understood that he had simply left her to die, because that was all that was left to him as an unawakened person. It angered him that he thought about it again, because even in such an emergency he could not do anything. If he continues to look for excuses, he won't be able to change anything, and something needs to be done. Meanwhile, the monster noticed the girl, who was unable to get up, and began to slowly move towards her. Bursting into tears, she realized that this was her last moment and the zombie had already rushed straight at her, wanting to infect her. But at that very moment, he was hit in the face with a fire extinguisher that Suho had picked up on the way back. But the boy didn't know that he had fulfilled the requirements to complete the secret quest, the courage of the weak. A long time ago, the boy had a dream, and everything in it resembled a game where you had to defeat monsters that became stronger. He leveled up and fought them again and again, as it became more and more difficult to fight the opponents with each floor. As the monsters grew stronger, he too had to progress by breaking down barriers. And after countless trials, he finally reached the last floor, where the final boss was supposed to be. He was very powerful, and even though it was his enemy, he couldn't help but feel aroused and even in awe of its power. But for some reason, the final boss turned out to be his father, which raised a lot of questions in Suho. It's impossible. The image that was imprinted in my memory was reflected in my dream. He was strong and reliable, but how did he manage to become like that? When the boy grabbed the fire extinguisher, he mentally asked his father what he would do in this incredible situation. The monster received a fairly strong blow, but was able to stay on its feet, since the damage was insignificant. The attacks of the unawakened, who have no mana, have no effect on magical creatures, and he acted too rashly. Suddenly, he noticed that time had stopped for some reason, and some kind of window, similar to a notification, appeared before his eyes. It said that he had completed the requirement to complete the quest and could now become a player. Suho was shocked to realize that this was the same thing as in that dream, and now he couldn't tell whether he was dreaming or not. If he can fight like he did there's no reason to give up in such a desperate situation. Now, it was much more important to protect himself and the surviving people, because he was being offered the power to fight. When he accepted the offer, notifications immediately started popping up, showing the quest rewards and his stats. At that very moment, he received a new quest, in which he had to defeat the flame spawn and level up. When he looked at the monster, he found that an inscription had appeared above it. Awakened D-rank flame spawn. Time started ticking again, after which he ordered his classmate to run away, and she agreed without hesitation. Now his enemies were two unawakened ones, and one hunter who had turned into a magical beast. Two monsters immediately jumped up, trying to attack him while the guy was thinking about a plan of action. Without wasting any time, he threw a fire extinguisher in the face of one monster to briefly distract its attention. When Suho realized that this did not help, he immediately swung his fist, asking the owner of this body for forgiveness. His blow was so powerful that it sent the monster flying upwards, and his face smashed through the ceiling, leaving him hanging. The notification announced that he had defeated the unawakened flame spawn, and the boy was surprised that he had done it in one blow. Without wasting any time, he kicked the second opponent, after which another victory notification popped up. His level increased, and the tutorial quest was completed, after which the system offered him a reward for completing it. He was offered to look at the reward, while only one opponent, a D-rank hunter, remained in front of him. Now, Suho was sure that this was not a dream, but he had no time to be distracted because there was still one opponent left. Without wasting any time, he rushed forward to attack, thinking only that he had truly awakened. However, the monster didn't even move when he received a blow right in the face, thereby stunning the guy. Suddenly, the flame spawn counterattacked, scratching Suho's chest and causing his body to burn in pain. Pushing off with his foot, the boy increased the distance to quickly inspect his wounds and his fighting capabilities. If he hurt him, he would turn into a magical creature. He didn't want to become like that right after waking up. Suddenly, a notification announced that a negative effect had been detected, and it was immediately removed thanks to the longevity effect. Suho was shocked to recognize this effect, having seen this window before, but at the same time the monster rushed to attack again. The hunter pushed Suho to the ground, not allowing him to escape or attack in any way, wanting to turn him into one of his own. If a D-rank who became a magical beast was stronger than him, then he was an E-rank, although that was the last thing he needed to worry about right now. Now the monster's face was just centimeters away from the guy, and he had to find a way to defeat it. At that very moment, he decided to accept the reward, which caused his strength to increase and he was able to push his opponent away. A slight increase in strength took hold, causing Suho to rush at him with his fists, not wanting to be turned. However, even after increasing his strength, he cannot defeat him, which means he needs to invest all available skill points into strength. After raising his strength from 14 to 19, Suho thought about how he had never heard of an awakened leveling up. Ranks are assigned upon awakening, and no one can become stronger than their rank, no matter how hard they try. However, he doesn't know who determines the ranks and the unawakened, because now he only had one goal, to survive. And now he had the power to escape from this damned building, but to do this he needed to defeat the hunter. The guy dealt him countless blows, smashing his body through the walls, trying to inflict as much damage as possible. After a while, a victory notification popped up, and his level increased 3 times, which spoke of the strength of his opponent. Sitting down on a stone, Suho tried to comprehend that he had won after all, and then began to examine his hands. Clenching his fist, the boy accepted the fact that he too was now awakened, but he still had many questions. Hearing the scream, Suho immediately stood up, because thanks to awakening he would be able to save people and cope with everything. Meanwhile, the monster below ran towards the building where the guy was, and then soared upward. At that very moment, Suho decided to assess the situation outside, and discovered too late that someone was already approaching him. Looking up, he noticed a monster swinging its sword, flying straight towards his window, wanting to finish him off. It was a C-rank hunter who created a deafening explosion as he burst into the building where Suho was located. The news reported that there had been a breakthrough at Hankook University of the Arts and asked all civilians to evacuate. At the same time, military personnel arrived at the scene and immediately cordoned off the area, evacuating all people. People were dying, but all they could do was stand and watch, and everyone wondered when the hunters would come. It takes some time to summon a B rank or higher hunter. Even though the gate is D rank, some hunters are infected. They couldn't believe that a C rank hunter had been infected and was now posing a huge danger to those around him. Meanwhile, the same hunter came up from the lower floor, slowly walking towards Suho. The guy noticed that this hunter was stronger than the previous one, and he even had a weapon, which made the task more difficult. However, he had just leveled up, but it was unclear if he had a chance of defeating such an opponent. At that very moment, the guy barely managed to dodge, seeing the blade of the sword a few centimeters from his face. It was like madness, because this hunter seemed unapproachable, swinging his sword at him again. With one blow, he cut through the fire extinguisher the boy was going to use to defend himself, but this gave him a few seconds to retreat. The explosion of the fire extinguisher created a curtain of fog, allowing Suho to run out of the office. He won't be able to stand up to this monster. That's why the awakened are divided into ranks. There is no need to wait for the hunters to arrive. Suddenly, the monster stopped, turning his attention to the roof where 3 girls were standing, which made Suho nervous. The frightened students decided to wait there until the hunters appeared, hoping that they would come as quickly as possible. Suho watched this in shock, as he couldn't help them in time, but he also didn't dare stand still. After making several jumps, he decided to reach the monster, realizing that only he could stop it. There was no time to wait for the hunters to arrive, and something had to be done to stop this monster from getting loose. He had to be stopped at any cost, because it was unknown how long it would take the hunters to arrive at the scene. Suho understood that one blow would be the end for him, so he had to try to attack while keeping his distance. He decided that he couldn't lose because in that case there would be no point in the power that he had suddenly acquired. After waiting for the monster to approach, the guy began to shower it with blows, but this did not produce any results. The monster swung his sword sharply, leaving a wound on the guy's stomach, and the enemy's speed did not decrease even after his blows. After kicking Suho away, the system announced that he had almost no health left and was on the verge. The guy thought he was lucky that he only had 1 health point left, and the system didn't want him to lose. He slowly rose to his feet, although he understood that he was no longer able to fight, but there was nowhere to retreat. His fatigue was almost 100%, but he decided to take the monster's blow, hoping for a final counterattack. The guy didn't notice how the dimension above his head cracked and a creature flew out of it because he was busy with the battle. As the monster was about to attack the boy one last time, something landed between them and cut off the former hunter's hand. Suho, who had almost lost consciousness, managed to notice an ant standing over his body. The creature immediately extended its hand and began to heal the guy, saying that everything happened because of his sluggishness. Noticing the monster, the ant said that they were the very insects that dared to harm his highness. With one swing of his paw, he cut the monster in 2 without much effort, after which he quickly disappeared. Meanwhile, teacher Suho, holding a mop in his hands, tried to keep another monster away from him. At that very second, the ant destroyed all the infected at incredible speed, leaving them no chance of survival. Looking at this incredible speed and clearing, the military tried to understand what was happening there. When the ant finished cleaning, it immediately returned to Suho, trying to assess his condition and saying that a lot of time had passed. Suho dreamed of his childhood, when he drew a lot, depicting various creatures that were always around him. At that very moment, a huge ant in a pink robe approached him, surprised that the young ruler had drawn him. When he called his name, the boy woke up, trying to understand when he had passed out and where he was now. Then it dawned on him that he was lying in a hospital bed and there was a doctor and a nurse next to him. A little later, his aunt called him and asked if he was badly hurt, since the trouble had come out of the blue. She decided that this would not work, and she would assign reliable bodyguards to him, but the guy wanted to refuse. When he opened his eyes, it turned out that 2 days had already passed since that day, and this incident had resulted in many casualties. A monster has appeared that infects and turns even hunters into monsters, a product of flame. Despite the fact that the incident occurred in the city center, the Hunters Association was belated in taking action, and by the time the hunters finally arrived, all the infected at the university had been killed, and it was unknown who was to blame. A terrified student who managed to survive gave an interview, saying that the monster just goes and explodes. When Suho turned off the TV and sat up, he realized that it had not been a dream after all, and he had indeed woken up. He also remembered that he was wounded, but he managed to survive when suddenly someone said that Burr got rid of that crap. The guy lowered his head in surprise, discovering an unusual shadow that was now talking to him. Suddenly, the ant emerged from the shadows, saying that he was very glad to see the young lord after so many years. Memories immediately began to surface in his mind like scattered pieces, and he knows this ant very well. It was one of the shadow creatures that was next to him in childhood, and besides it, there were a lot of other shadows. Bear said through tears that he had crossed the boundaries of dimensions to meet him, but he didn't understand why he only remembered him now. There were too many questions, for example, why in childhood he lived with these shadow creatures, as if nothing had happened. Beer used to be larger, but this was due to the reaction to the large amount of energy consumed to move between dimensions. And when he saw his level, he was outraged that the system dared to demote the marshal to some soldier. The guy also noticed that thanks to him, his body became better because Burr was a talented healer. The purpose of his arrival was to remove the seal from the young ruler, but he managed to do it perfectly well without it, which was amazing. And it might have seemed like a dream to him, but it was all real. Since he fought with him, the guy became noticeably stronger. The great Shadow Lord Seong Jin Woo sealed his powers along with his memories, hoping that he would live a normal life. Grabbing the ant, Su-ho, in shock, began asking about his father, because he should know why he abandoned him. The ant replied that he had not abandoned him, but had gone into space, which amazed the guy even more. As it turns out, the Shadow Lord is waging war against invaders from outer space who want to enslave the entire world. Su-ho found it hard to believe that his father was protecting the world while being so far away from the Earth. Now he is fighting with the gods from outside, the Itarims, not giving them the opportunity to influence their planet in any way. The Itarims send their apostles to take over the world, and on the way here, Bear managed to defeat many enemies. The appearance of the gates and monsters on Earth probably arose because of this war, but that means his mother followed him too. Bear was surprised that she disappeared on the same day as her father, so the boy decided that they had decided to fight together. However, the ant could not believe that Lady Haeying had disappeared, and was sure that this was all the work of the apostles. Su-ho finally found out the truth, and it's all because of those damn Itarims, and his parents can't come back because of them. When asked if he wanted to convince his parents, the boy replied that he had spent so many years alone. Beer explained that there was only one way because due to the war, the Lord of Shadows would not be able to come to Earth for a long time. But after the young master becomes stronger, he will be able to find Miss Haeying and see her. Suddenly, the ant pulled out an unusual-looking key, loudly announcing that it was time to level up a little. The boy held the key to the Shadow Dungeon in his hands, and along with it he received a new quest, the Shadow Test. Now he needed to insert the key into his shadow to open the gate to the dungeon and complete the quest. Once he had done everything necessary, a portal immediately began to appear in front of him, which made Su-ho shudder. Beer urged him in a friendly manner to enter the dungeon and take all the power that was rightfully his. He still didn't believe the story about space, the War of the Gods, the Lord of Shadows, because it was simply nonsense. But even if that's the case, if he can only meet them after gaining strength, he will level up as much as he wants. Looking at Su-ho, Bear remembered how Seong Jin Woo had ordered him to go to Earth and break his son's seal. The Shadow Lord explained that the Itarim invasion could also affect the Earth, so Su-ho needed to be prepared. He needed to regain his sealed powers and memories so he could protect the Earth himself. Otherwise, he allows you to make decisions independently, depending on the situation on the planet. Since the Lord instructs him to act at his own discretion, Bear will oversee the young lords level up. The next second they entered the land of the dead, where the living can enter only after receiving permission from the ruler. A shadowy dungeon appeared before Su-ho, looking like a ruined city, and the sky was covered with purple clouds. At first glance, Su-ho thought it looked more like a ruined city than a dungeon. He didn't know why, but this place seemed familiar to him. But at that very second, a notification with a survival quest popped up. He had to hold out for 4 hours, while Burr advised him to be on guard as danger lurked on all sides. The ant announced that the test had begun, but the boy still couldn't figure out what was going on, while the enemies were already close. Suddenly, a goblin attacked him from behind, swinging an axe, but Su-ho sensed its approach in time. In front of him was a goblin scout, the blow to which did not cause significant damage, and he was still able to fight. Bear warned that there was only one of him, which meant there must be more goblins lying in ambush nearby. Su-ho decided to kill him before he called their side, while the ant was worried about the Lord's security. The guy immediately noticed that his name was White, which meant that he was weaker than him, or they were equal in strength, and it would be easy to defeat him. At that very moment, he snatched the axe from the goblin's hands and struck him on the head, not giving him a chance. By pointing to the monster's body, Su-ho proved that he was not his opponent, asking Bear not to worry. He explained that those who are stronger than him have colored names. The ant immediately understood everything and did not argue. Suddenly, a horn sounded next to them, and raising their heads, they noticed another goblin blowing into a horn. At that very moment, a multitude of goblins appeared in front of them, among whom were a centurion and a captain with colorful names. Beer really wanted to help him. He is too far from the master and cannot restore his mana, and must save it. Moreover, if he entered into battle, Su-ho would receive much less experience, and now the guy had to fight alone. He realized he had no choice, so he reached out summoning the axe he had taken from the first goblin. After this, the guy rushed into the attack, deciding to first deal with the small monsters that did not pose a threat. Suho used the ruler's authority. This skill was written in the stat window, and it felt like he had an invisible hand. Reacting, he caught the arrow, noticing the archers who had positioned themselves on the rooftops to keep their distance. Using the skill again, the boy sent the arrow back, hitting the shooter's head cleanly, thereby eliminating him. Bear was shocked by Suho's adaptation, and the young lord's infancy was like the legend of the birth of a hero. He freely used the power of the ruler that he inherited from his master, and there were quite a lot of problems with this. But this force was created for destruction, and it interfered with a peaceful life, which is why many children did not accept it. But as the Ataramov disciples attempt to invade the land, the young lord's power finally returns. And now Suho is using all the power available to him to level up and destroy the goblins. As his level increased, the boy realized that with the power of the ruler, he could lift objects weighing up to 10 kiloibs. Distracted by this thought, he made a mistake because he missed a blow from behind his back and the goblin plunged the blade into his side. Throwing him away, Suho grabbed his wound while Baru began to worry about the overlord as he was surrounded. His health was reduced by 30 units, while the goblins began a simultaneous attack on the wounded guy. Pulling the knife out of his body, Suho sent it flying with a sharp movement, aiming at the centurion. At that very second, the boy realized that he had never felt so alive because he felt power. Meanwhile, the goblins began to attack him from all sides, while the guy's health gradually decreased. Losing health points, he tried to fight back against every monster, sparing no one, because this was his chance. After some time, Suho leveled up 5 levels and unlocked a new skill, Fortitude. Sitting in the car, the guy tried to catch his breath as the survival timer finally reached 0. Beer had no doubt that the young ruler would pass the test, but he was unhappy that he really didn't try to help. At that very second, a reward notification appeared, one of which was a runestone with the ability to extract shadow. The ant was pleasantly surprised that the young lord would receive the shadow extraction that his father possessed. Suho was surprised that he received the skill of Fortitude in battle, because in addition to the level system, he can also learn skills. This system is an improved version of the one the overlord used, and now serves as a tool for his steady growth. The guy summed it up, thinking that he was unawakened, but it turned out that he was the most powerful necromancer, to put it briefly. At that very moment, he accepted the reward, receiving in his hands the runestone, which he had to break in order to master the skill. Without wasting any time, he clenched his fist, breaking the stone, and suddenly felt a new power boiling inside him. This skill allows one to create soldiers from corpses. Shadow extraction is the foundation of the shadow ruler, Seong Jin Woo's power. But to control corpses, he must first obtain them, which means he can control those weaker than him. Suho heard that summoning skills were of low value among hunters, so he tried to extract the shadow from the goblin. The system asked him to assign a command to extract the shadow, which made the guy think hard. He thought that the command should be comfortable, while Bear trembled with impatience, and Suho announced the command, "Rise up." At that very moment, the shadows of several goblins, who were level 1 and normal rank, appeared in front of him. Suho watched the scene in surprise, as this was his first successful shadow extraction. Usually, new shadow soldiers are weaker than they were in life, and they also become even smaller. The description also said that they would disappear within a day since he didn't have the shadow storage skill. Beer frowned, realizing that intelligence level and points greatly influenced the power over shadows. It would become a good skill later, but now the ant was very upset about the lack of this skill. Suddenly, Suho's stomach growled loudly, and the guy remembered that he hadn't eaten properly for 2 whole days. They explained to him that he could leave here at any time using the key to the shadow dungeon. When he returned to the hospital, he immediately began to devour dinner, realizing how delicious the hospital food was. While the boy was eating, Burr decided to explain to the master what he should do now since he only had 3 missions. The first is to protect the land from the outer gods, which means he needs to go into the dungeon and hunt monsters. This is how he will increase his level. The stronger he becomes, the safer he will be on Earth. This is what his father did. The second mission is to find Lady Heiying, and if he hunts monsters, he might be able to find a clue about her location. And the third, most important mission is to restore Bera's power, which he lost on the way to Earth. After all, he still can't believe that he's just a private, but he wants to appear in all his glory before the master. He can gain portions of a target's magic and knowledge by absorbing it, an ineffective method he used even before becoming a shadow soldier. But since he can't get magic from the master, he has no other choice, and somehow he needs to eat something magical. Suho needs to get a hunter's license to enter the dungeon, so they had to go to the association. The guy thought about it, because he is awakened and is able to raise his level, which leads to questions. First of all, he was interested in what rank he would be given, initially deciding that it would be S rank. That same evening, after a check, he was informed that his magic level was 46, and he was an awakened E rank. Beer explained that his rank was very low and he needed to focus on improving his stats. Irritated by the disappointing result, the guy asked not to reassure him, as it would only make things worse. The shadow power was low in level, and now the rank was low, causing him to wonder if he was capable of protecting the land. Raid groups rarely take E rankers, in which case even getting into the dungeon will be a problem. Suddenly, he realized that there was one way. It was indirect, but it was better than nothing. In raids, there is a clear division of responsibilities with a strike team defending the dungeon. Meanwhile, the collection group follows and collects parts of the monsters, from which armor and weapons for the hunters are made. There is also the weakest ore mining squad, which extracts resources while in the rear. Unlike the strike team, even E-rank hunters are accepted into the gathering group and the mining team. Sometime later, Suho thanked Lim, who was his only acquaintance, for helping him get here. This guy was a teaching assistant at Hankook University and also an E-rank awakened. He was glad that there were elders nearby because thanks to him, he could work in the dungeon, gaining new experience. Suddenly, Lim called out to him and bowed sharply, apologizing for what happened at the university, thereby surprising Suho. The eldest was the only one, but he got scared and ran away alone, leaving the others in mortal danger. He apologized for not being able to do anything, while Suho asked him to raise his head. The Hunters Association recommends running as fast as you can when a magical beast appears, and he was simply following the instructions. Lim was surprised to learn that Suho was also an E rank, and his mana level was even lower than his own. The elder at first thought it was impossible because he thought he had seen this guy fighting monsters on the roof. It is quite possible that he simply imagined it out of fear, because it is hard to believe that he could stand up to them. If an E rank fought a monster and survived, that was impressive, and Baru told him that the young lord was incredible. Turning his head in surprise, Lim jumped back in fear, loudly declaring that there was a monster here. The ant explained that Suho was now as weak as an ant larva, so he was only calm when he was next to him. Lim was stunned that the guy had awakened as a summoner, since many E-rankers had no skills at all, and he was lucky. The Elder One decided to boast that he had running skills, and now it was clear why he did it so well. Lim didn't appreciate the joke, remembering the recent incident, which immediately made him feel ashamed of his escape. Barry was pleased that he had mentally destroyed him, but the boy turned around, ignoring his words. It came to him that, with the exception of the Shadow Dungeon, he had never been to any other. Currently, a strike team is hunting monsters there, but for safety reasons, the mining team is prohibited from going there. At this time, the hunters concluded with dissatisfaction that it was empty here, and there were only magical wolves around. Wolf pelts are cheap, but soul stones can sometimes be found in pipes, so they just need to work hard. They urged each other not to be upset because you never know what might await them in the dungeon. Suddenly, one of them told the commander that there was something there, pointing to a huge crack in the rock, the size of a man. When they entered, they found strange ruins and initially wanted to request reinforcements from the association. However, detection skills did not detect any monsters here, which raised the question of what this place was for. One of them suggested that instead of a boss, there was treasure hidden here, pointing to a sword sticking out of the stone. They were surprised, but at the same time tense, because they managed to find a rather powerful artifact. To be sure, you need to evaluate it, but you need to be careful because usually such treasures are surrounded by traps. At that very moment, the captain asked everyone to step aside, wanting to pull him out personally, after which he extended his hand to the handle. They started warning him that it could be a trap, but the C-rank tank was confident that he could handle it. As soon as he touched the sword, he immediately felt something ominous, as if someone was devouring his consciousness. When the man pulled out his weapon, his comrades breathed a sigh of relief, noticing that none of the traps had been triggered. One of the hunters asked him to be more careful next time, but at that very second the tank cut off his head with a sword. The rest of the comrades watched this scene in shock, noticing that their captain's eyes had changed. At that very moment, the man asked in a voice that was not his own, who dared to covet the blade of the Monarch of Fangs. And then he gave himself the order to kill those who invaded the domain of the Lord of Fangs, starting to attack the hunters. Meanwhile, the two miners who had just arrived stared in surprise at the unusual scene. Several goblins were actively swinging their pickaxes, and the workers were surprised that such summoning spells existed. Many knew that summoners could control one or two creatures at a time, but Suho had three, not counting the ghost. However, it was inconvenient to summon only three. The guy needed more corpses to use shadow extraction. However, their bodies can be retrieved from the shadow dungeon, as they do all the dirty work without any questions. Beer asked not to praise him after giving the goblins such an insignificant task of mining ore. He can't enter the dungeon alone right now, but he plans to test it again once his mana increases. The guy reminded that they came here for a reason that concerned the return of Bera's former powers. After all, he needs to absorb objects saturated with mana, including these magic stones that are scattered everywhere. Since he's useless at getting them, he might go and eat a couple of them from the ground to replenish his lost mana. As soon as the ant began doing this, it immediately shuddered, announcing to the ruler that it felt the presence of the monarch. However, it was not his father, because even then his powers would have instantly been restored, which means that someone else bears this title. Beer smelled an unpleasant animal smell, while someone's angry roar came from the depths of the dungeon. The worried miners began asking each other what the sound was, since that was where the strike team should be. At that very second, several pairs of red eyes appeared from the darkness. They were wolves heading in their direction. The men did not understand why the animals were there, but decided to leave this place as quickly as possible. One of them began waving a pickaxe in fear, trying to drive away the animal, which ignored his threats. Suddenly, Suho came to his aid, smashing the animal's skull with one swing of his pickaxe, thereby saving the boy. He decided to buy them time by demanding that the others leave while he dealt with the animals. Hearing the word of gratitude, the boy stood in front of several wolves, fully prepared for battle. Their names were orange, meaning their level was the same as that D-rank flame spawn at the university. But if only he was alone, he could have extracted the shadow from the dead wolf, but Lim stood behind him. He asked him to leave, but the elder was not going to run away anymore, not allowing the guy to help everyone alone. Suho ordered the goblins to guard the elder while asking them to cover him if necessary. Opening his inventory, the guy took the goblin weapon he had picked up in the shadow dungeon, as it was better than the pickaxe. Meanwhile, Lim was stunned that he could even summon weapons without understanding what his abilities were. Don't waste time. The guy was the first to rush into attack. I want to destroy as many animals as possible in a short time. He began to cut down the animals one by one, while the elder watched in amazement. The goblins encouraged him. Despite his doubts, Suho began extracting shadows from the dead wolves to help him in battle. And now the battle was on equal terms, and the summoned wolves began to attack their own comrades. Beer was pleased that the young lord had so quickly gotten used to fighting side by side with the shadows. Currently, absorption and summoning do not consume any mana, so in the future, he can acquire his own army. The next second, he pierced the mouth of another wolf, adding another soldier to its ranks. The surprised goblin watched as the master began to summon wolves that were significantly stronger than him. Suho completely forgot that he was being watched, so he calmly used shadow extraction on all the slain wolves. He shuddered when he heard that his physical abilities were far from E rank, and that he also possessed such a summoning. The boy realized that he had gotten too carried away, and now he was trying to figure out how to explain all this to his elder. Meanwhile, Lim became worried that he might be one of those fake ones who hide their real rank. Suddenly, Suho received a new quest. He needed to defeat an enemy who was trying to kill the player. One enemy surprised the guy because he had already defeated all the wolves, after which he turned his gaze into the depths of the dungeon. At that very second, a man came out of the darkness towards them, but his gait was rather strange and his aura ominous. The elder immediately realized that he was from the strike force, but Suho only tensed up more when he didn't hear an answer from him. Stepping forward, Lim began to tell how they were suddenly attacked by magical beasts, asking what had happened to them. Suho decided to warn him, but it was too late, because the hunter had already swung his sword at him. The guy managed to pull the older man back in the last seconds to save him from certain death. To gain some time, he launched an attack by wolves, which were supposed to distract the hunter for a short time. However, what was worrying at the moment was that his name was red, which indicated his excessive strength. The redder the name, the more dangerous the enemy. He had already felt the power of red at the university. His strength is great, but he is far from the title of ruler, but this does not mean that he will be able to resist him in his current state. Opening his inventory, Suho decided that this was enough, while Baru watched the overlord with concern. The system helps him to ensure stable growth, and since he received the quest, he has a chance of winning. In order to see his parents, he must become as strong as possible and as quickly as possible. That's why he will defeat the red one and become stronger right now, because it was a direct path to his parents. Beer noticed that he was faced with challenges again and again that he could not cope with, but he never ran away. This still weak image is superimposed on the image of a ruler who was able to achieve everything by devoting himself entirely to the cause. However, the body of this creature is a sword. If you cut off the arm and separate it from the carrier, then it will no longer be able to move. At that very moment, wolves attacked the hunter from all sides, with the aim of immobilizing him so that it would be easier to separate him from the sword. One of the wolves quickly recovered when the guy gave him some mana, because shadow soldiers are immortal as long as the owner has mana. However, this did not particularly stop the man, who destroyed the wolves again and again, not letting them get close to him. This upset Suho a little, but Bear explained that it was only because he was still weak, just like his soldiers. Suddenly, the hunter pointed his sword at him, asking how such a worthless person dared to use the power of the Shadow Monarch. Beer was displeased that he dared to call the young master from the line of Shadow Lords a non-entity. The man repeated the last words, not expecting that they would meet the enemy of the Fang Lord under such circumstances. Suho decided to take advantage of the moment and throw a dagger at him, but he managed to react and deflected it. Taking an axe out of his inventory, the boy decided to begin with a reconnaissance mission in order to quickly assess the opponent's strength. When the battle began, as expected from a red name, he easily fought off every attack. Then the guy decided to take the quantity, after which he used the power of the ruler, throwing goblin weapons at the enemy. He had been using this ability since childhood, and later he felt it very well and could control several objects at once. But the goblin's weapons were only enough for one attack, and it felt like it was impossible to fight them off. One blow from him and he would be finished, but if Suho hesitated, any chance of victory would disappear altogether. The Fang Lord didn't like that the boy was always running away from him, continuing to hide behind the monarch and the shadow soldiers. Speaking to his parents in such a tone was too much, but it was precisely these words that gave rise to feelings of anger in Suho. Despite his provocations, he lacks the confidence to come closer, but he needs to become stronger. He remembered asking Barrow why, after the seal was removed, his power to climb the tower did not return. As it turned out, his power had been sealed when he was little, causing him to regain the talent of those days. That power would have been enough to stand against the Itarims, but it was a test of whether he could control his talent. The power was supposed to disappear regardless of the outcome of the test, but the experience of being in the tower is not meaningless. Now he needed to remember the fighting spirit and feelings from that time, when he fought in hand-to-hand combat in the tower. Shadow soldiers are essentially immortal, and as long as they have mana, they can regenerate as much as they want. Bear is also able to change his shape at will, which gave the guy an interesting idea. Suho once again summoned the wolves, who were ready to fulfill any will of the master. The Fang Lord decided that the guy was stepping on the same rake, so he simply decided to cut him into pieces. As the sword descended on Suho, the man was surprised to find that he was wearing gloves made from Raikan. In this way, he increased his shadow extraction level, and this was enough to get closer. Beer watched in amazement as the master was able to turn the battle in his favor by starting to fight the hunter directly. Suho had just awakened his powers, but he had already discovered a new level of shadow power that no one had told him about. The sense of combat he had shown so far was the power of an overlord that was now in his hands. Even the way he uses the power of shadows shows that he is already capable of defeating his opponent. During this time, Suho continued to strike his opponent, and was eventually able to knock him back with one powerful blow. As the dust cleared, the Fang Lord growled loudly, dissatisfied with the outcome of the battle. Using the ruler's power, the boy rushed into the attack again, pointing the goblin's weapon at his opponent. Looking at this battle from the outside, Bear is ready to say with confidence that this guy now looks like a real prodigy. Once the Fang Lord was defeated, Suho stopped worrying about his red name, for victory was his. He also learned something new in this battle, which was a very worthy acquisition, and now he has something to fight with. When the notification appeared, the first thing the guy did was check the reward he received for completing the quest. He received a runestone Storm Slash, and now he could attack multiple enemies at once. Suho instantly understood how to use it and decided that now was the time to try it out. Meanwhile, the sword that held the essence of the Fang King could not believe that it had lost to the heir of the Shadow Monarch. However, this was not the end, because human greed is limitless, and if the guy touches him now, he will lose. As soon as he understands this sword, his consciousness will be immediately absorbed, and he will take the place of the heir. However, something happened and the sword began to change, while the system announced that it had received Rakan's Fang. The Fang Lord didn't expect that there was a person that even he couldn't capture, even though he had received the power of a monarch. Due to the blessing of the spellcaster Kandiaru, all negative effects are automatically removed from Suho, making him impossible to subdue. Without wasting any time, the boy swung his sword using a storm slash, destroying the wall in front of him. It was problematic that the skill drained all the mana in one use, but its power was quite great. Suddenly, the guy noticed that Lim was starting to come to his senses and immediately hid the new weapon behind his back. Suho decided to tell everyone on the way about everything that had happened, while the elder became frightened when he noticed a hunter lying nearby. When they got outside, the guy decided to go back and check if there were any survivors left in the dungeon. Looking at him, Lim thought that he was an awakened E rank who possessed the skill of unusual summoning. It's a small detail, but Suho is very strong, although it doesn't matter now because many survive thanks to him. Returning to the dungeon, the guy was able to find the remaining Raikans, which he began to destroy with shadow gloves. There are still fewer wolves, but he gains experience from each one, so it's best not to miss any of them. Suho wondered why the sword's attack power had suddenly dropped, to which the weapon replied that it would not cooperate with the Shadow Monarch's successor. Bir was indignant when he noticed a special skill for fighting the weak, but the sword ignored his observation. Suho was surprised to first encounter a talking insect, and now he also encounters a sword, which makes it increasingly difficult to understand anything. Walking a little further, they discovered the very passage in which the dead hunters, killed by the Lord of Fangs, lay. The sword replied that he simply killed everyone who set foot here, since it was his duty to protect this shrine of the Fang Monarch. Suddenly, the guy grabbed him and thrust him into the stone slab where he was originally located and asked him to be quiet for a bit. Suddenly, he discovered that he could use shadow extraction on people and thus could turn anyone into his soldier. Suho lowered his outstretched hand, then raised his bodies and headed towards the exit, which greatly surprised Bira. He thought that if they had to fight after death, it would be like a punishment. At that very moment, the boy began asking questions about whether his father had killed this monarch, and whether he was also an Itarim. The Itarims are their current enemy, and the monarchs can be called the enemies of the past. There were 9 monarchs in total, including the ruler. The great Seong Jin Woo, known as the Shadow Monarch, is the king of the dead who rules over the entire afterlife. Besides him, there was also the king of beasts, the monarch of beast fangs, the queen of insects, the monarch of plague, the king of humanoids, the monarch of the iron body, demon king, white flame monarch, giant king, monarch of the beginning, king of the snow people, monarch of cold. There was also the king of demonic ghosts, the monarch of transfiguration, and the most powerful of them all, the king of dragons, the monarch of destruction. And when the 8 monarchs invaded the land, they all died at the hands of his master, which greatly surprised Suho. Suddenly, the sword confirmed that the Shadow Monarch was the eternal enemy who had killed its master, the Fang Monarch. If he had all his power, he would have torn him apart, minced the Shadow Monarch's successor, and then fed him to the wolves. Suho understood his feelings perfectly, because his father had defeated other monarchs to protect the land, while the sword guarded this place from invaders, and they both were simply protecting what was dear to them. However, there is a difference, and now he wants to fight him because Suho is his successor, and nothing more. But if it was his duty to protect this place, then wouldn't it be foolish to be at odds with his father, since the Fang Monarch couldn't defeat him? The guy wants to meet his parents, but can't because of the outer gods from space, so he borrows power from whoever he can get his hands on. If the Itarims come, they will spare no one, so he is forced to ask the sword for help, and it will help him defend this place. These words made the weapon consider joining forces with the successor of the Shadow Monarch, Shadow and Fang shoulder to shoulder. The next day, the correspondent asked Lim to tell in more detail what happened and where exactly the attacking force was defeated. This guy was one of the few who survived yesterday's incident, and now he was ready to tell them everything. However, if people know about Suho's success, they will treat him better, regardless of his rank, and this is a great way to return the favor. That same evening, an article was published online. It concerned an E-rank hunter who single-handedly saved the hunters inside. The article included an eyewitness account from someone who saw everything personally, and also included accounts from other people who were saved by the hunter. A controversial issue arose within the Black Turtle Guild regarding increasing the manpower for the gathering group. Lee Young. Go from the 2nd Division decided to send them the candidate's profile for the others to review. It was an E-rank hunter who wanted to enter the D-rank dungeon, evacuated the gathering group, and pulled out the attack squad. They couldn't believe that an E-rank had done this, but if they recruited him, they could create a big stir. Because of this, a hero may appear among the E-ranks, and right now they decided to try to contact him. After some time, it was interesting to see if Suho had responded, since an E-rank who had received an invitation from the guild should be happy. However, shock was written on the faces of the elders when they learned that he had declined the offer, deciding not to join the Black Turtle. They didn't understand why a low-ranking person refused an offer from a large guild, and what the reason was. The workers were outraged, thinking that the guy thought he was S-rank, but they were sure that he would soon contact them again. Meanwhile, Suho finished another phone call, sighing heavily from the pressure of the different guilds. Ever since he visited that dungeon, the invitations to various guilds have not stopped. They all want to hire him as a collector or miner, but there were too many applicants. Joining a guild will be an obstacle to leveling up through the system, so there is no point in it. The guy then looked at Rakan's Fang sword, offering him to continue the conversation from there, but they didn't finish anything. During our last conversation, I couldn't understand how the guy could so calmly say something so meaningless. However, a shadow can be an ally, not an enemy, so he asked to be brought to another Fang Monarch shrine. And he knew the location of the Fang Monarch's shrines, no matter how far away they were. He also felt that the gate leading there had already disappeared, and people called it a dungeon breakthrough. It turns out that the sanctuary has turned into a field-type dungeon, which makes their task a little more difficult. These were lands left empty by a dungeon breach that occurred through abandoned gates where monsters lived. Suho's uncle wrote that he would be leaving for a while and asked him not to worry if he stopped communicating. After that, he packed his things, not forgetting to grab his sword, deciding to go to the sanctuary right away. A couple of hours later, when they reached the designated place, the guy was slightly surprised, standing in front of a closed area. This was not a very good sign, because this place belonged to the Hunters Guild, and entry was prohibited for others. Trespassing is illegal, and the Hyena Guild was created for criminals and is full of thugs. Bear wanted to suggest not listening to this creature without a neck and raising the level, but suddenly he hesitated, looking at the owner. Suho was determined to enter, even if the guild was against it, and he had his own ways to get around them. Using his power as a ruler, he broke the CCTV cameras so that no evidence would remain. When they entered the territory, the guy wondered if it was always so foggy in field-type dungeons. Fog is cosmic magic. It destroys spatial barriers and creates cracks in the world. The cosmic deities are trying to create a huge hole in the dimension and send troops here, but this requires a huge expenditure of mana. It turns out that the strongest enemies will not arrive soon, which means they have enough time to become stronger. At that very second, monsters that looked like wild monkeys and cats began to appear in front of them. The sword immediately began to glow with energy, wanting to demonstrate its power, to which Suho responded with a smile. However, the boy decided that he would not use it as a weapon, which surprised the sword a little. He had already thought about how he would fight, after which he rushed at the monsters with bare hands, wanting to attack. As a base, he used hand-to-hand combat, which was closer to him than swinging a sword. In the medium and long term, he will help himself with the power of the ruler, choosing to be unpredictable. Due to his pressure and speed, the animals could not keep up with him, which is why they were destroyed one after another. Suho also decided to obtain more equipment through shadow extraction. This is his new fighting style. Bearer was beside himself with happiness, while the sword thought with admiration about the strength of the Shadow Monarch's lineage. The more enemies there are, the longer the fight lasts, and the stronger the guy becomes, using the dead. Suho's intelligence has increased slightly, and you can now summon 5 shadow soldiers that you made from beasts. It seemed to Baru that this was nothing compared to the thousands the Lord had, but the guy asked him to shut up. After walking a little further, they noticed an area where the gate leading to the sanctuary was located. The guy didn't care that there were still people there, even though it was already too late, which was strange. It was unclear why they were here at such an hour, since it was better to hunt monsters during the day. Suddenly, a car pulled up to them, and tied-up guys and girls started getting out, under the watchful eyes of the guild. Suho immediately realized that they had witnessed a kidnapping and couldn't just back out now. Beer decided that it was better for them not to interfere, since they were invading someone else's territory and they could be caught. But when he looked towards the ruler, he noticed that he had already left, heading down closer to the enemy. His father was a violent crime detective, and his grandfather was a legendary firefighter, so it's clear who he takes after. Meanwhile, the man who was touching the tied woman's cheek felt someone approaching him. It was Suho, who was already in the air, pointing his foot towards the villain's face, wanting to attack. The guy, who watched his family for 21 years, got used to acting as soon as he saw injustice. The blow was enough to crush the man into the ground, temporarily knocking him unconscious. The others immediately grabbed their weapons, while the guy scolded himself for the fact that his body moved on its own. Trespassing on other guilds' territories is prohibited, so we had to quickly figure out how to get out of this situation. Suddenly, an idea came to him to create a mask out of the shadow, speaking in a heroic voice about kidnappings and dangers to people. Ignoring his statement, Suho again began to ask who he was to have entered their territory and gotten into a fight. Without waiting for an answer, the angry hunters immediately rushed into battle, wanting to punish the illegal intruder. The average rank of hyena guild members is D, so the guy has decided not to use his full power for now. However, even this was enough to greatly surprise his opponents, who began to crumble easily under his blows. Suho was concentrated and fought back from all sides, not letting the enemy's weapon get close to him. Now he has grown to the level that people who are assigned a D rank cannot do anything against him. The guy also thought with surprise that it was too simple, although his characteristics were far from ideal. Within a few minutes, all the guild members present were tightly bound and unconscious. Shaking off the dust, the boy listened to Bear's praise, after which he decided to untie those who had just been brought here. They thanked him for his help and decided that he was a hunter from the association. The guy immediately agreed with this. Suho added that he would take care of the rest, asking them to go to a safe place as quickly as possible. Once they disappeared, the question arose as to why the guild would kidnap people in the first place, as there was no point in doing so. However, Rakan's sword suddenly sensed something unusual, thus deciding to attract the guy's attention. Pointing to the warehouse, the weapon stated that the real reason they came here was there. Upon entering, Suho was stunned to see huge cages, bowls, and chains, as if animals were kept there. However, it was obvious that kidnapped people were being held here, but there was also some strange energy in the air. Looking into one of the cages, they found a peacefully sleeping puppy which was injured and on a leash. But the sword was sure that this was not a puppy, but a captive young wolf cub, whose energy was simply suppressed. In fact, this puppy is the heir of the King of Beasts, the Monarch of Fangs, which stunned Suho. Immediately after the defeat in the war against the Shadow Lord, the Monarch of Fangs protected his heir and sent him to a safe place. He believed that if his heirs survived, another monarch might one day be born, but he did not expect another monarch to be born. His true goal was simply to protect his legacy, as he was not 100% sure of his own victory. The puppy emanated energy that belonged to the monarch, but he was extremely weak. If left alone, he would definitely die. Suho was about to make a decision when his friend's eyes widened when the gate suddenly opened. The guys outside are lying unconscious, and the guest hoped that there would be at least a couple of people here, but he sees only one. The guy was shocked to see a monster who was saying that this guild was useless and that people couldn't be trusted. At that very moment, the sword was surprised that Brokey was alive, and Suho did not imagine that they could be acquainted. As it turned out, this monster was the heir's guard, who was also glad to see the sword that was still alive. Suddenly, Rakan flared up. I asked if he had forgotten that he had to protect the heir. Looking at the puppy in the boy's hands, the question arose. How could he allow the heir to be on the verge of death? Suddenly, Brokey approached Suho, smelling the scent of the person who dared to touch the puppy. The guy immediately realized that this monster was fast, and he, in turn, quickly took the heir for himself, attacking Suho. A worried bear watched from the side as the young lord took the full brunt of the monster's attack. Having destroyed the wall and the container, the guy realized that of all the blows, this one was the most painful. Blood was coming out of his head and his ears were ringing, but at that very second the resilience skill kicked in, increasing his physical defense. When they first arrived, Bear felt a dense energy and only now realized what it really was. When he explained that the energy of the Itarims was coming from this monster, a look of shock appeared on the guy's face because he didn't expect this. Meanwhile, Rakan did not understand why Brokey was behaving so carelessly and insolently with the master's heir. He explained that he was able to control such power when he left the shelter, and someone really helped him with this. This is the law of nature. The strongest survive, and the weak obey them in everything. The strong must absorb the weak. This little thing is pitifully weak, even though it comes from the Fang monarch family and is perfect for a snack. Periodically, he sucked out his blood, which contained particles of the Fang Monarch's power to increase his own. Then he decided to kill them too, because half-breeds who couldn't compare to his power couldn't do anything to him. Rakan died because he was weak, but he survived, which means he can easily be called strong. Brokey decided that he was the most suitable to become the new Fang Monarch, but at that very moment he was suddenly attacked. Beer managed to catch the puppy, which the monster threw into the air due to pain, preventing it from receiving even more wounds. Suho noticed that Fang was very angry with him, which meant that they shared each other's feelings right now. Now, they have created the first alliance of Shadows and Fangs because they have a common and quite powerful enemy. Besides, the guy finally found a clue leading to his father, which means he needs to get the information at any cost. At that very moment, a notification popped up about a new quest where Suho had to defeat Brokey and ensure his safety. Biru, holding back tears, has no choice but to watch and not interfere while the Overlord fights. Looking at the monster's name, Suho realized with a grin why their guild had such a strange name. But it was unclear how the monster was able to found a guild while kidnapping people, and whether it was connected to the Iturims. Suddenly, the bound guild members regained consciousness and turned to Mr. Brokey, drawing his attention to themselves. They asked to be released because this guy is not so simple and they agree to help him defeat him. Suho swung his sword, determined not to let him do it, but immediately froze, looking at the monster in shock. With his mouth wide open, Brokey only needed to close his jaws once to cut off the heads of all his guildmates at once. Brokey, I need help against something like this from those who deserve to be nothing but his prey. Without wasting any time, the boy rose into the air, pointing his sword at his opponent, who had treated his comrades so horribly. Blocking the sword with his bare hand, the monster heard the question of how he dared to kill people for such a trivial reason. Brokey replied with a crazy smile that in life the weak belong to the strong, because that is the law of nature, and the strong don't need a reason to do what they please because no one can stop them. At that very second, the guy began to dodge incredibly powerful blows that could cause enormous damage. Suho had already managed to withstand one of his attacks, but if this continued, his defense might not hold up. The guy soared into the air, wanting to increase the distance for a moment so that he would disappear from the enemy's sight for a while. After this, he began to sharply descend downwards, using a storm cut trying to inflict serious damage. However, the small scratches only made Brokey laugh, because that was all that could make him a relic of the Fang Monarch. But suddenly he felt a sharp pain as the blade plunged deep into his back. Suho hadn't finished his attack yet, and then he used the power of the ruler, starting to spin the sword inside the monster. Meanwhile, Fang was asking why Brokey had become like this, since he had praised his master and sworn allegiance to him. Brokey remembered praising Rakan, but at that moment his mind went blank and he began to draw his sword. He screamed loudly and threw the weapon aside, breaking it into small pieces, not wanting to agree with the Fang. Now he had no respect for him. All this time he only bowed before his power. He won't continue to drag out such a miserable existence when Rakana has long been dead. When Suho looked at the sword in horror, he was distracted for a second, which caused him to receive a painful blow to the stomach. The boy's eyes bulged out as he felt the bones inside him break and pain burn through his body. But when he thinks about his father, who is fighting somewhere out there, it gives him a second wind. Overcoming the pain, Suho began to create shadow gloves to fight back against his attacker. He couldn't afford to give up now, because he still had a lot to do to meet his parents. Meanwhile, the Fang's power continued to leak out from the cracks of the sword. Perhaps this was its inglorious end. The life of the heir, and even the future of the Fangs, now rests on the shoulders of son Suho, but he would like to continue fighting. Suddenly, the Fang turned its attention to the master's heir, who began to awaken from sleep, baring his teeth. At the same time, Suho continued to fight with Brokey, turning away from his blows and trying to deliver his own. Fang realized that the heir was inspired by the way this man fought, and his eyes lit up with fire. The last thing he can do is share his remaining power with his descendant so that he can help the guy win. However, time was running out, as Brokey managed to attack the guy who was already at his limit. His health was almost at zero, and he thought that he could surpass himself, but he overestimated his capabilities. Brokey also noted that he had lasted quite a long time for a mere worm, but was it possible to defeat him? Rushing forward, the monster opened its mouth, wanting to deliver the final blow to the defenseless target. When his hand was a few centimeters from Suho's face, a huge wolf came to the boy's aid and bit Brokey. Between the boy and the monster stood the heir of Rakan, who had regained his former great wolf form. Suddenly, a notification announced that the Fang heir was paying tribute to the player's fighting spirit. The system also offered to recruit the heir of the Fangs as an ally, which stunned Suho. He couldn't believe that the heir of the Fangs, that wolf cub, and he could recruit him, making him his ally. Brokey didn't expect that Rakan's heir would decide to absorb the Fang's mana, which would restore his former powers. Suho was surprised to realize that the Fang had sacrificed itself to save the heir, thereby proving its faith. And since he was planning to unite with the Fang from the very beginning, then nothing will stop him from uniting with the heir. He had no reason to refuse, so he gave his answer to the system, which immediately responded to it. Suddenly, the boy felt a connection between himself and the wolf, which meant that the system had united them into one team. Then Suho saw the wolf cub's memories of the time when they lost the war with the Shadow Monarch. Brock told him that in this world, the strongest survive, and they, the losers, would lose a lot. For the Fangs to prosper, the heir must become stronger, and therefore he is obliged to protect it with his life. But the next second the memories changed, the wolf cub trembled, looking at how strange people surrounded Brocky. The monster didn't understand why they didn't kill him, because now he was on the verge of death, very weak, and covered in wounds. The woman holding the child remarked that the monster seemed content to be useful and therefore suited them perfectly. When she chose it, a golden stone was inserted into the monster's eye, and the wolf cub trembled with fear, looking at this picture. From that moment on, Brokey's goal was to capture people and offer them to them as a sacrifice. What she put into him was supposed to make him stronger, so he shouldn't give up that power. Of course, everything depends on the user, but any desire can be distorted, which directly affected Brokey. When Suho returned to reality, he realized with horror that he had seen all the memories of the heir of the Fangs. The beings who placed something in Broca's eye are clearly connected to the Itarims in some way, and that's a clue for him. And at that very moment, it became clear that the heir of the Fangs did not want to take revenge on Brokey, but to stop his rampage. Since this has to do with the plans of these creatures, he must defeat Brokey to find out all the information he needs. But looking at his opponent, it becomes clear that he does not have enough strength to defeat such a monster. But suddenly, the system announced that, having recruited an ally, he received a quest in which he had to recruit 8 heirs of the monarch. He also learned a new alliance skill, forming a bond with the heir of the Fangs, which the boy immediately felt. Noticing the bright light, Bear thought that the young lord's experience was very different from what his king had gone through. Brocky didn't understand what was happening, but he wasn't going to just wait and suddenly rushed into the attack. But to his surprise, the attack was unsuccessful, forcing him to retreat, knocking down various obstacles with his back. When the alliance skill was successfully created, Brocky was surprised to notice the change in the appearance of the boy standing in front of him. Suho changed beyond recognition. A cross appeared on his forehead and his hair became longer, turning completely white. This skill allowed the heir to inhabit his body, improving his physical condition, and his senses became sharper, like those of a beast. While the boy was trying to figure out how he was able to absorb the air, Brokey swung his hand again, wanting to attack. Suho began to dodge every blow with extraordinary ease. His body became light, and all his senses became heightened. Now, the slightest movement was enough to avoid danger. And now he was not afraid of the monster's attacks. After finishing dodging, the boy counterattacked, kicking Brokey right in the chin, causing him to spit out blood. The monster was confused and didn't understand what was happening, because this boy didn't look like the one he was a couple of minutes ago. However, now he cannot lose, because then he will lose everything that the saviors gave him, giving him strength. Brocky didn't know what the guy did, but she was sure that he would never lose to any person. The difference in strength comes from the inequality of species, and the human species is the weakest in the universe. Before their fists met, the monster asked the boy to blame himself for being born a pathetic person. At the same second, Suho learned the hand-to-hand combat skill, allowing him to deal an additional 33% damage to enemies without weapons. Meanwhile, Bear was outraged that the monster dared to talk about the difference in species in the presence of the young ruler. When the ant said that there was no one higher than the Shadow Monarch, Brokey realized who stood before him. Looking at the guy attacking him, he realized that the Shadow Monarch boys were connected much more strongly than he thought. With one incredibly powerful blow, Suho managed to trample the monsters to the ground, creating enormous destruction and a shockwave. When the opponent was defeated, the heir of Rakan detached himself from the boy's body, returning him to his former appearance. In a semi-conscious state, Brocky, as if in a delirium, said that he had to become stronger. Suddenly, the heir of the Fang approached his comrade, starting to lick the place above his eye, breaking the curse. As the veil lifted from his eyes, the monster remembered with despair in his voice why he had to become stronger. He remembered his master mentally apologizing to him, because then he was furious with defeat. When the system announced that Suho had defeated the hyena Brokey, the air howled loudly, and the boy's level increased. Beer wanted to praise the young ruler, but he stopped him, because now there was something more important than praise. Ant sensed the Itarim energy from Broca, and he managed to catch a glimpse of the Fang heir's memories. The hunters who entered Brokey's dungeon placed something in his eye, and they may be messengers of the Itarims. Perhaps these were apostles for communication with reality, and their deeds should be connected with the invasion of this world. The Itarimov apostles are on Earth now, but it would be good to get more information, trying not to lose the trail. Bera had a way to find out something. He could absorb Broca's corpse to see the Itarim's memories. Besides this, he will be able to restore his mana, thus killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Suho was surprised that he had such an ability, but he didn't know whether he should do this to the heir's protector. Looking at the wolf, who did not take his eyes off the monster, the guy invited him to go with him to show him one place. At first, the heir looked at him with displeasure, after which he came up and began licking him like a loving dog. Having decided to take the wolf away, Suho opened a portal to the shadow dimension, wishing Baru good luck along the way. The ant was a little embarrassed, thinking that the gentleman was too kind to him, but the matter did not require delay. A little later, Baru became curious about why the Lord decided to go to the dungeon instead of returning home. Suho decided to first find a home for the heir of the Fangs, but the ant thought it was strange to do this in the shadow dungeon. Now they were allies with him. He had no protector, and his sanctuary was also gone, and now the guy felt sorry for him. Suddenly the wolf turned around, and the system announced that the heir of the Fangs wanted the player to give him a name. At first, Suho wanted to name him Rocky, but Burr thought with a shudder that his ability to give names was just like his master's. A smile seemed to appear on the wolf's face as he received a new name, and the level of trust increased to respect. At that very moment, the guy declared this forest to be the territory of the Fang, asking that it be used profitably, and the system accepted this order. You don't have to worry about food because Rakan's heir can eat living creatures or monsters. There are still some monsters he hasn't gotten rid of, and it's a good idea to ask Rocky to clean up. As if sensing his master's desire, the wolf rushed to attack the goblins who were hiding among the trees. Sitting in the tree, the guy thought that Rocky was moving well, but he needed to sort out the things he had received. At that very moment, Suho received the title of Wolf Slayer, and when fighting beasts, his characteristics increased by 40%. The boy then turned his attention to a quest that required finding the heirs of the monarchs and recruiting them as allies. Beer heard that the leveling system created for him had been revised to remove the ill intentions contained within it. The plan was to forcibly strengthen the man known as Sung Jin Woo, and the architect used him. His father was to be a vessel for the Shadow Monarch, and once the goal was achieved, the soul was planned to be destroyed. However, he was able to go against the goals of the system and became a Shadow Monarch himself, contrary to the architect's plan. However, there can only be one Shadow Monarch in a world, so the system has been slightly revised. She adapts to the direction Suho is moving in and serves as a guide for him, creating new functions. The guy thought about the purpose of his system, after which he decided to look at his characteristics, which he hadn't looked at for a long time. Ever since he encountered the Flame Spawn, his stats have increased significantly. He gained a lot of useful skills, but he is still weak. Even in the last battle, he would have lost if not for Rocky. If the quests match his wishes, they need to be completed, and after completion, he will be able to meet his parents. After jumping down from the tree, the boy also became curious as to whether Burr had been able to find any traces of the Itarims in Broca's memories. Ant looked through them completely, and yet he did not find the apostles who had brainwashed Brokey, as if they had never existed. At first, it seemed to him that there were no leads, but Burr managed to notice something interesting. There remained memories of the man who founded the Hyena Guild for Brokey and took in kidnapped people. Suho was stunned that the monster was able to receive help from outside, and from a large guild at that. His guild was called the Grim Reaper, and if they dug into that guild, they might be able to find out more about the Itarims. Meanwhile, the leader of the Dark Priest contacted Lim Do-jen, who was supposed to leave for Southeast Asia to help. However, it didn't matter now, because the news said that he was behind the incident with the hyena. The man tried to deny everything, but he was asked not to deviate from the topic since everything was already known. Lim found out that Min Sung had carried out some task for the hyenas, and the association would soon find out about it. However, one should not be too self-confident. because the chairman of the association is not so easy to deal with. He should clean up after himself before he gets back so that no more truth comes out. Min-sung was unhappy that this guy was just his driver, and when he became an S rank, his arrogance just started to ooze out. Overcome by emotion, the man slammed the table, shattering it into tiny pieces, unable to contain his anger. He learned from the survivors that a young masked hunter had defeated Brokey and wiped out the entire hyena guild. He can't waste time on someone he doesn't have enough information about, so he'll leave that for later. After all, right now he has something more important. The man looked at the small sphere he held between his fingers. It was stardust, a stimulant to awaken hunters. If business takes off, no one will be able to look down on him. Beer encouraged Rocky to try even harder so that he could become useful to the young ruler. Suho was surprised that the ant called him by a different name, but was still glad that he adapted quickly. Suddenly, the system announced that the ally had received experience from hunting monsters, which was divided with the player by 50%. The guy immediately told Baru about this, asking if such a system had existed before, but he couldn't give a precise answer. Something similar happened when the Shadow Soldiers fought and earned experience for the Shadow Monarch. He only gets half, but the automatic level up is pretty useful so Rocky can keep hunting. Suddenly, a new status window appeared, stating that Suho had completed the conditions for receiving the quest in the Shadow Dungeon. After that, the daily dungeon clearing quest began, where you had to kill 100 goblins, 10 captains, and 1 centurion. The guy was pleasantly surprised that he would be able to get this quest every day, for which he would be able to receive a reward. It seemed the system wanted to make this place his territory, but he still needed to find a large number of goblins. Suho suddenly remembered how he had obtained the horn flute when he was killing the goblins, and it would be able to summon them to him. The next second he began to blow into the horn, creating a loud and unpleasant sound, calling the nearby goblins. They didn't have to wait long because a huge pack of armed goblins was already running towards them from behind the nearby trees. Beer was amazed at the master's ingenuity because it made their task much easier, without wasting time searching for them. Clenching his hand into a fist, the boy rushed towards them in an attack, wanting to gain as much experience as possible and complete the quest. His blows sent the monsters flying in all directions, while his fists became covered in blue, sticky blood. Now he was already bored of fighting goblins, but the system required him to defeat a whole bunch of these creatures. Without thinking twice, the boy used the flute again several times to increase the number of goblins. A few moments later, an entire army stood before him, ready to destroy the alien summoner. Now, the number of enemies was quite suitable for him. With a wave of his hand, he caused the nearest dead goblins to rise. The guy ran forward while Rocky kept up, starting to pick off his opponents one after another. After 3 hours of hard hunting, the wolf was very tired, while the quest suddenly began to be overfulfilled. The quest was completed and Suho was offered a reward, but he was in no hurry to agree. Looking at the only notification, the guy was in thought, as he noticed something strange. The numbers were acting strange because the quest was completed, but they kept growing, as if it wasn't the end yet. Suddenly, Suho smiled, realizing that for exceeding the goal, he could receive a greater reward than what was originally given. Since the counter isn't stagnant, there might be some other hidden quest, so they need to keep hunting. After a couple more hours, Rocky was completely exhausted and the kill counter stopped when twice as many goblins had been killed. The quest ended again, and the guy was again asked to choose a reward. He was glad that nothing could be hidden from him. First of all, he chose to restore his status, due to which his health and fatigue were fully restored. As you level up, it becomes increasingly difficult to become stronger, but with this reward, daily stat boosts are guaranteed. The final rewards he had to choose were a random cursed box or a random blessed box. One gives what he wants and the other what he needs, but the second case is unlikely to coincide with his desires. What he wants is too vague, and the list of things he needs won't fit even on one sheet of paper. Suho decided to pick a random cursed box and was pleasantly surprised to receive the Vulcan Horn Gloves. These gloves had 2 effects, one of which increased damage and the other, by absorbing demon souls, increased strength. He couldn't turn the Shadow Soldiers into weapons all the time, so a separate weapon would be very useful now. Damage increased by 30%, and with the number of demons killed, the damage would also increase, but the gloves were a bit heavy. Investing his remaining stat points into strength, Suho decided to simply hunt demons and upgrade new weapons. Suddenly, the system indicated that Rocky had changed his trust from respect to fear, and Bear explained that the wolf did not have infinite stamina. He then decided to call it a day, deciding to find something outside. after which he thought about the Grim Reaper Guild again. After leaving the Shadow Dungeon, Suho was thinking about where to start his investigation when suddenly his phone rang. This was an SMS from a teacher who asked for help. It was written as if he was in danger. When he reached Seoul Station, a joyful Lim began waving at him, thanking him for his speedy arrival. As it turned out, he was planning to go into the dungeon, but at the very last moment the team abandoned him. In the end, not a single person showed up for work, and he had no choice but to turn to a trusted comrade. The elder was sure that they were drinking somewhere, but Suho asked him to calm down, since he agreed to help. Lim handed him a protective suit, because the work of a collector is much more difficult than that of a miner, so the suit is a necessity. The mining team digs up resources after the cleanup is complete, while the scavengers collect items left behind after a kill. The suit is needed in case of an unexpected ambush by monsters, and besides, the fangs and claws of corpses can also injure them. Looking at his new uniform, Suho didn't expect that hunters took safety so seriously. At that very moment, a strike force approached them, and was surprised that there were far fewer collectors than expected. Lim explained the situation, but the hunters reminded them of the contract and the money they had invested. They threatened to send an official complaint to the association, and because of such carelessness, there would be no more work for the collectors. It looked like complete irresponsibility on the part of the strike team, but Lim wasn't even the leader of the collection team. The elder hastened to assure them that they could handle it, barely audibly asking Suho for help using a summoning sound. Meanwhile, the guy carefully examined the strike force, trying to understand what rank they were. He noticed 4 D-rank mages, 5 D-rank fighters, and 1 C-rank healer. The one who was shouting now was a healer. The cursed box gave him what he needed, a demon-absorbing weapon, and the timely arrival of Lim. And also the field-type dungeon, the owner of which is the Grim Reaper Guild. All this cannot be a coincidence. Meanwhile, deep within the building, there were 3 demons tormenting the body of a barely living man. The guy's instincts were literally screaming that something terrible was about to happen, so he needed to be prepared for anything. At this time, the strike force that entered the dungeon immediately took up combat positions as soon as they noticed the monsters. The leader asked the gathering team not to stray far and to work quickly, since there were only 2 of them. Suho was surprised to see the lizard monsters, as he was sure that there would be demonic-type monsters here. However, it was a good opportunity to see a team of hunters fight live, and it is necessary to study how they interact in battle. At that very second, the guy inserted the key to the Shadow Dungeon to open the portal between dimensions. Thanks to completing the daily quest, he had a lot of corpses of goblin captains and centurions left. After increasing his intelligence, he can summon 7 shadow soldiers, which will allow him to complete the job even faster. Meanwhile, the strike force finished with the first horde, deciding to rest a bit before moving on. The team was surprised by such a quick break, but nothing could be done since they only had 2 assemblers. The leader was sure that they were delaying them, but when he looked in their direction, he noticed that the goblins had already finished everything. Suho, in turn, noticed that the strike force was much slower than he thought, because they should have already moved on. The man, in shock, began asking about the summoned creatures, and Lim thought he was trying to start a fight. But suddenly the leader grabbed his hand, literally begging him to become their special collector, but the guy was not going to work as one. The man promised that he would have the highest salary on the market, when suddenly his subordinate reported a problem. When the boys said that they had stumbled upon a human corpse, the leader and Suho froze, trying to comprehend what they had heard. A couple of minutes later, they were standing over the charred body of a man, from which blue flames were still emanating. Judging by his appearance, he was a simple civilian, but now there is practically nothing resembling a human being about him. No one had ever heard of any creatures here that could control fire, but Lim and Suho immediately guessed everything. It was very similar to the flame they first encountered at university. The leader decided to ask more questions after learning that the 2 had been at the scene that day. At the same moment, a strike team from different ends of the corridor reported that there were bodies of people scattered everywhere. One of the teams suggested stopping the raid and reporting everything to the association, since it was unknown what lay ahead. These bodies were indeed civilians without equipment, but their team is made up of hunters, so there shouldn't be any problems. In the end, the leader decided to continue, which surprised Suho, who thought that going further in such a situation was the stupidest decision. The guy didn't want to change his mind, but the leader had the final say, so he asked the team to follow them. Lim also didn't like this idea, but Suho reminded him of the running skill that someone had. Frowning, the guy warned him in advance that if things got tough, he should run without looking back. Entering the narrow tunnel where the rails began, Suho already felt that nothing good awaited them ahead. Meanwhile, in the deepest part of the mine, people who were still alive were writhing in pain, engulfed in blue flames. The three demons watched their suffering as if it were sweet music to them. Their firepower leaves much to be desired, but it is important for them to know how progress is being made in providing them with more fuel. It turns out there are resource issues, making it harder to get fuel, and they need to create a new supplier. They need it a lot and quickly, because they didn't expect the hyenas responsible for the fuel to have problems. Because of this, they will produce less stardust than others, which will negatively affect their reputation. Suddenly, they spotted a presence from above. Sensing the hunters, they were delighted because their fuel was on the way. One of them decided to go and meet them, but at that very moment he was reminded that he had to capture them alive. At this time, the strike team continued to deal with the lizards, which they did not see as much of a hindrance. The leader decided to treat the wounds of his allies, thinking that they would earn quite a lot of money today. Suddenly, he put his hand in his pocket, deciding that today was her time, since they had excellent collectors today. Taking out a small sphere, the man showed the stardust to his allies, asking if they knew about it. It was a mana booster, very popular among modern hunters and not easy to get. The effect lasts only a week, but its power is enough to raise the rank of a weak hunter an order of magnitude higher. If he uses it right now, he will become a C rank, which will make the raid much easier for the whole group. As the last words left the man's mouth, he felt something approaching him very quickly from behind. The demon who came out to meet them swung his sword, hitting the leader in the back, and reminded himself that they were needed alive. Stardust shattered onto the ground, while the rest of the squad thought they were being attacked by the boss. But when the demon claimed to have struck with the blunt side and not killed, the hunters became even more frightened, because the monster could talk. In any case, it was their enemy, so they had to stay on guard, but their forces were clearly insufficient. At this time, the demon counted 10 hunters, whom he considered strong opponents, but he was not going to retreat. Taking out stardust from his sleeve, he decided that he didn't need all 10. It would be enough to kill strong hunters. The strike team was stunned when they noticed the coveted pill in the monster's hands, not expecting that even monsters would use it. Rushing forward, the hunters decided to kill him before the effect took effect, because it was too late to run away. Without moving from his spot, the demon dealt with the two guys who were closest with one swing of his sword. The wizard, who had not managed to break the distance, immediately fell dead when the tip of the demon's sword pierced his head. Due to the death of this wizard, the light in the tunnel disappeared, making it easier for the demon to deal with the uninvited guests. Meanwhile, Suho had a new quest. He had to rescue 7 survivors captured by a demon. The guy, who was quite far from the strike team, was surprised that a demon suddenly appeared there. The guy immediately told Baru everything, who was tense at the thought that somewhere nearby were those very demons who were kidnapping people. The more people he saves, the higher the reward, and very soon they may find themselves in great danger if he does not arrive in time. Without wasting any time, he told Lim that something had happened to the strike team, so he needed to get out of the dungeon quickly. The goblins began to escort him to the exit, while the Elder One denied it, trying to fully understand the situation. But when he learned that Suho was going to search for the strike force, he immediately calmed down, understanding his situation. He knew he would only be in the way, but he decided to immediately ask the association for help as soon as he got out. The guy immediately decided to team up with Rocky because he didn't have a second to lose. Meanwhile, the demon dragged the bodies of the hunters to the others, and the other two were surprised by his speed. The gates were about to open and demons would be summoned, so he could throw on some firewood to celebrate his victory. They were glad that they were replenishing their fuel supply because now they would be able to produce stardust without any problems. A poison they learned to make through secret demonic techniques, and a stimulant derived from berserker venom. Berserker venom can increase a person's magical powers, but has a side effect. It absorbs life energy. The side effects of flame could be mitigated by replacing them with fire from the underworld. But all this happened only thanks to the apostle who told them such a secret method of production. Magical creatures that corrupt living beings and turn them into insane monsters are what the apostle brought into their world. Thanks to this, the low-ranking demons seemed to have a chance to become stronger, which is why they were incredibly happy. Suddenly, the demons shuddered, sensing someone approaching, not expecting that there were still hunters left here. Staring at the door, they realized that this was impossible and there was a high probability that a new hunter had arrived. At that very moment, the door was knocked off its hinges by a powerful kick, after which Suho entered. Carefully examining the room, The guy realized that he had found those he had been so desperately waiting for all this time. But suddenly he froze, noticing behind them several flame creatures that were tied up and being burned. Luckily, the people were still unharmed, but at that very moment Suho was suddenly attacked. At the last moments, he managed to dodge, not allowing the blade to harm his body in any way, which surprised the demon. The guy immediately realized whose hands had killed the hunters because this demon was moving at incredible speed. However, Suho also decided to show what he was capable of by deciding to attack the demon, but he managed to put out his sword. The other demons were surprised that the boy was able to dodge the attacks of the younger one who had taken Stardust. They decided to take matters into their own hands, and then took the Stardust while Suho fought the youngest. The brothers immediately asked the younger one to step aside so that they could personally deal with the impudent intruder. The guy decided to retreat for a while, breaking the distance between the two opponents as quickly as possible. But one of them managed to get behind Suho, using magic that pierced the guy with electricity. Suho managed to give a command to the shadows, after which the summoned creatures immediately began to take shape. The goblins immediately rushed to defend their master, mercilessly attacking the nearest demon with their bare hands. This caused the monster that was holding Suho to freeze in a daze as he guessed who was in front of him. Taking advantage of this pause, the boy threw the demon away while he announced what he had seen to his brother. It looked exactly like the power of the Shadow Monarch that they, the demons, had observed on the day of their destruction. However, he is much weaker than the true Shadow Monarch, so it is easy for them to defeat him. There is no need to fear him, because there is only one of him, and his strength is not enough to overcome them under the influence of Stardust. Suho quickly assessed that each of them was weaker than Brokey, but fighting them at the same time would be difficult. He remembered that Bear had saved Broka's corpse, but he didn't understand why he was leaving it if the soldiers were getting weaker. At that moment, the guy thought about something when he saw his last moments and made a decision for himself. And now, he can use his power to make him his warrior, because for a long time he was under the control of the Itarims. But in that case, he needed Rocky to give his consent, because Brocky was his protector. Looking at the wolf, he looked happy that his comrade decided to do one last good deed for the defender. Without thinking, Suho opened the portal to the Shadow Dungeon using the key given to him by Baru. He reached out to Brokey, giving him a chance to fight if he still repented for his dark deeds. Hearing his call, the hyena's shadow immediately rushed towards its owner, wanting to help him in the upcoming battle. At that very moment, a warrior appeared before the demons who was much stronger than the goblins. Recognizing Brokey in this shadow, the demons were unable to believe that this boy had defeated him and then taken him for himself. Now, Suho, Rocky and Brocky were here, their entire squad, and Burr, with tears in his eyes, asked them not to forget about him. At that very second, the entire team rushed into the attack because their forces were approximately equal, and each had their own opponent. The terrible sounds of battle were heard, and both sides did not want to give up the advantage to the other. But suddenly, not far from them, a red gate appeared, from which a girl slowly emerged with a weapon in her hands. She didn't understand who had decided to summon her, assuming that it was a demon who was hunting her. Suddenly, her eyes widened in surprise when she noticed the shadow soldiers participating in the battle. Meanwhile, Suho was fiercely fighting one of the demons, not paying attention to the appearance of the stranger. He was already close to defeating the first demon, raining down incredibly powerful blows on it. Suddenly, a charge of electricity fell in front of him, from which he managed to jump back in time. They won't be easy to deal with, and if the battle drags on, Rocky will simply drain all his mana. Even Brokey, who had become an unknown soldier and lost some of his strength, reached his limit while fighting only one of them. He had to somehow separate them in order to knock them out one by one. But at that very second, a girl appeared in front of him. Pointing her spear at him, she frowned, deciding to find out where Master Seong Jin Woo was since his shadow soldiers were here. Suho didn't understand where the wounded night girl, who was also looking for his father, came from. However, Bear immediately recognized her and began asking what she was doing there. The girl recognized that voice in the same way. Delighted to see a familiar face, the girl began to ask where his body was, adding that she was very glad to see him. She didn't let the ant answer, continuing to bombard him with questions that he couldn't answer right away. The demons were surprised that for some reason she was familiar with their enemies, and they would have problems if she chose them aside. Meanwhile, the girl smiled, unable to believe that she would meet Bera here, which made her feel completely relieved. The ant stated that she was just in time, suggesting that they continue the conversation later, but for now she should take care of these demons. Meanwhile, the opponents decided to first get rid of the wounded demon, because for Stardust, they only needed her blood. Suho thought he had seen her somewhere before, but he wasn't sure if she could handle it alone. But Bear knew the answer for sure. Even demons of several ranks are no match for her. Her name is Essel. She is a demoness and the eldest daughter of the Ladir house. When the Overlord destroyed the demon world, he only spared her family, and her abilities are at the S rank level. Hearing this information, the guy was shocked because right now he would be able to see how they fight. But contrary to his hopes, the very first blow to the girl forced her to throw away her weapon and fly to the ground. When she landed next to the guy sliding across the slabs, Bear asked when she had become such a weakling. Even the volume of her mana was not what it used to be, but suddenly the girl began to cry because something had happened to her during this time. About half a year ago, most of the demons in their world rebelled, but their family was unable to suppress the rebellion alone. Her relatives helped her survive, but during the escape she lost a lot of blood and became weak. Baru decided that healing her was a waste of mana, and Suho realized that he now had two companions who had lost their powers. The demons didn't recognize her at first, as she had become much weaker, but they didn't expect to meet a survivor of the Ladir family here. And now they have a great chance to become stronger by absorbing the blood of a noble demon. The guy thought that if he could fight them one-on-one, he would definitely defeat one of them. Suddenly, Bear decided to use the ability he received after restoring part of his mana. Pointing at Essel, Bear used the Severe Orders skill on her, which was supposed to increase her stats by 50%. But at that very second, another notification popped up, saying that Essel was suffering from a side effect of madness. The ant sent the demoness forward, but the girl rushed into battle without his instructions despite her wounds. Suho thought she was a bit pathetic, but at least now they could fight one-on-one. The fight resumed again, but now the guy had an ally on his side who did not absorb his mana. Suddenly, a lesser demon appeared behind Essel, swinging his sword, wanting to get his hands on the noble blood. However, the blade did not have time to reach its target, because Suho intercepted the demons in flight at full speed. He threw the monster away from Essel and the other demons, wanting to deal with it one-on-one. Running sharply towards him, the guy intercepted the enemy's sword, after which he cut him in half, gaining victory. His body immediately caught fire and began to melt, and the system announced that he had killed a low-ranking demon. After killing a demon, the horn of the volcano absorbed his soul, causing his gauntlet's damage to increase by 31%. Meanwhile, Essel tried to break through the demon's shield, which was unhappy that the younger one was killed. He needed to do something about this crazy woman, when suddenly the skill of giving stern orders suddenly ended. The girl fell unconscious in front of the demon, causing him to hesitate for a second, trying to understand what had happened. But before he could do anything, at that very second, Suho came up behind him and grabbed him by the neck. This second was enough to decapitate the demon while he was still weakening his defenses and vigilance. Distracted by the system notifications, the guy missed the blow of the last demon, which threw him into the wall. The last survivor was unhappy that the numerical advantage was now on their side, which worsened his position. When Brokey came out to him, the demon decided that it was not over yet, after which he decided to retreat. He knew that running away wouldn't save him, because this guy was damn fast, so the demon came up with another plan. Instead of attacking, he decided to capture Essel for the blood of the noble demon, which would help him become stronger. But as soon as the monster approached her, his hand was pinned by Suho, who couldn't allow him to do this. In this way, he was able to immobilize the demon, which gave Brokey the opportunity to attack the demon head-on. When Essel opened her eyes, she began to complain to Beru that he was very rude for treating her this way. However, she could not believe that anyone other than the master could command the shadow soldiers. The ant was sure that she lacked fidelity, which is why she did not recognize him, after which he suggested that she use her brain. Taking a closer look, the girl realized that she didn't have many options, and the correct answer was too obvious. When Suho and Rocky disconnected, the system stated that his level was now above 20 and he could use the store. At this time, Essel couldn't take her eyes off the guy, recognizing him as the small child that Jinwoo was holding in his arms. She addressed him out loud as a young master, managing to briefly distract him from the system's new option. The guy was surprised that she addressed him in such a way, while Brocky was affectionately stroking Rocky. Essel recognized him immediately because he had changed so much, but now he looks just like Mr. Sung Jinwoo. As the last words left her lips, the girl suddenly fainted, leaving the guy in confusion. Bearer explained that she had passed out from exhaustion and was still alive, so there was no need to worry. After this, the ant began to heal all the surviving hunters, whom Suho still managed to save. The system gave a notification about the completion of the quest, for which the guy was supposed to receive a generous reward. As a reward, he received 3 skill points and 700 gold, after which he immediately opened a store. Now the guy can buy items in the shop window for gold, where there were quite a lot of items and potions, earn money by completing quests, just like when he was a kid and earned pocket money by doing small errands. This thought brought back pleasant memories of his parents, causing an involuntary smile to appear on his face. And since the system had been passed down to him from his father, the boy decided to mentally thank his dad for the pocket money. Reading the description of the healing potion, Suho was surprised that he couldn't transfer the item to another. He then suggested that he could give her some of it to drink, thus bringing her back to consciousness. Having uncorked the bottle, Suho began to slowly pour the liquid into the girl's open mouth, trying not to spill a drop. Beera was unhappy that he had wasted gold on a useless demon, but added that he had a good heart. Suho decided to take her with him to the Shadow Dungeon, asking Brokey to also grab the demons they had defeated. Without thinking twice, the hyena grabbed the carcasses of the 2 demons and placed the youngest one on Rocky's back, after which they headed into the portal. Bear was surprised that the Lord was not coming with them, but Suho had unfinished business in this place. He approached the flame creature, thinking that they were suffering while being engulfed in flames. He waved his sword and apologized to them, as this was the only way he could help them find peace. After some time, the association's workers arrived at the station, and one of the hunters began to listen attentively to the report. The bodies of dead hunters were discovered in the field dungeon, but this was not the work of magical creatures. Deeper in the dungeon, they discovered a basement partially destroyed by the blade, which greatly confused them. The hunter wondered if there was someone else there besides the magical creatures, and Lim behind him decided to return. But suddenly the man turned around, starting to ask him about Suho, who was supposed to be on the team gathering this detachment. The guy honestly answered that he was his colleague who agreed to help, to which he heard the question of where he was now. Lim guiltily admitted that they had escaped from the dungeon together, and he had evacuated him to a safe place. It's embarrassing to admit, but they are E-rank hunters and were only able to ask for help from the Hunter Association. The man praised him because he made the best possible decision in accordance with the association's guidelines. Then he turned around abruptly, loudly ordering that the station be thoroughly searched for any traces. However, Lim was absolutely certain that the one who saved the surviving hunters was Suho, who went there alone. The guy didn't know why he was hiding his rank, but it certainly wasn't done with bad intentions. Meanwhile, in the shadowy dungeon, Esil came to her senses and could not believe that everything turned out exactly this way. Mr. Sung Jin Woo decided to leave the Earth to protect it from invaders from outer space, and Bera was sent to Earth to remove the seal, but the young ruler turned out to be a genius and managed it himself. Looking intently at the girl, Suho decided to ask her name again, because it seemed to him that they had already met. The first time they met was during his training, and he promised to remember it, but now, apparently, he has forgotten about it. The guy seriously thought that for some reason he couldn't remember those events normally. Suddenly he remembered that in that dream, which turned out to be training, he met this girl, but he was in a great hurry. That time she gave up during the meeting, and Beer was outraged that she responded so inadequately during the test. However now, the ant was more concerned with the question of why she had become so weak, and what had happened in the demon world. After the Radier clan took first place in the demon world called the Demon Castle, they began to wait for Jin Woo's summons. For several decades, I lived in disarray. Since the master did not call them, 6 months ago, a problem arose. A mana enhancer called Stardust suddenly began spreading among the demons, out of nowhere. Suho immediately remembered that the demons he fought had talked about something like that. If a low-ranking demon uses Stardust, their mana will increase without any effort. Therefore, during the absence of the master, the demons began to unite with the aim of rebelling against the Radier clan. And so, the rebellion that broke out on this basis escalated into a full-fledged war between the clan and the rest of the demons. Her clan fought to the last, defending the demon castle that Lord Seong Jin Woo had entrusted to them. But they lacked the strength to suppress the uprising, and after 6 months of war they were defeated, leaving only a few survivors. However, the demons did not stop there. They captured the clan members and began to drain their blood to gain greater power. This is how her father and her entire clan died. This is how she weakened, losing her strength along with the litters of blood that were taken from her. She is the only survivor left and doesn't even know what the master will say to her when he finds out that the demon world has been captured. Suddenly, Esil's eyes widened in surprise when Suho praised her, as he sometimes wondered what his father would do. In this situation, he would say exactly that, to her and her clan members who were fighting to the death even in his absence. Even the guy himself decided to thank her for fighting for his father until the very end, without retreating. He then added that he would try to help in any way he could, after which he offered to return to the Radish clan. A seal remembered how Seong Jin Woo had suggested something similar to her and had mangled her clan's name in the same way. Suddenly, a notification appeared where the last surviving member of the pure-blooded demon clan, Rod Here, thanked the player. With a smile on her face, she corrected his mistake and the system offered to recruit Asil as an ally. Suho was taken aback by the fact that Asil was the second lord he had to form an alliance with. Most likely, it was because there were no more pure-blooded demon aristocrats left besides her. The boy accepted the offer, after which he received the energy of the descendants of the Lord of the White Flame. The girl also had a window, which stunned her, as she had never seen anything like it. Rocky can't speak, so he didn't know, but Suho's allies also get an alliance window. Isil became one because she is a descendant of the Lord of the White Flame, but the girl was surprised because she didn't know about it. After some time, they went outside as the guy was eager to test Isil's new abilities. He approached the girl, offering to try out their new skill with her. She was embarrassed, but agreed. Isil immediately changed her appearance, beginning to fill the guy with energy, which he immediately felt. While Suho was looking at his hand with surprise, from which energy was oozing, Isil collapsed from exhaustion. Her face looked emaciated, causing her to apologize, as this skill had completely drained her energy. The guy was surprised that after the first time she was already in such a state, and he had no idea what kind of power this was. Lying on the ground, Essel realized that she was transferring her power to the young ruler, thereby completely exhausting herself. Suho was curious to see how powerful this force was, so he decided to hit the building. Leaving only a small dent, they, together with Burr, looked at the wall in surprise, completely disappointed. It was even weaker than his usual attack and a little different from his connection with Rocky, but Asil paid for it with her energy. This is probably because the battery percentage is 0, but there is no way to increase the battery level written here. Suddenly, Bear made a request to his master, asking him to eat the bodies of the demons he had transported to the Dungeon of Shadows. The guy wanted to save them in order to extract their shadows later, to which the ant suggested doing it right now. Suho extended his hand in front of the bodies and gave the command to rise, but surprisingly, nothing happened. Suddenly, a notification popped up saying that contaminated mana had been detected and shadow extraction was impossible. Jinwoo also couldn't extract the shadows of demons whose souls were impure, so he summoned them like Rod Here. Since they had polluted souls, Suho did not hesitate to offer these bodies to Beru, who was very grateful. While the ant was busy eating, Suho decided to spend some time with the girl who had spent so much effort for him. The guy offered Asil a healing potion to drink, but the girl found that she was only getting in his way. However, she has nowhere to go now, so she can use this part of the territory as she sees fit. Suho gave her the right to the territory because they are now allies, so there is no need to think about such trifles. At that very moment, they heard Bara scream as he looked through the demon's memories with a frowning face. He was able to discover a clue related to the Apostle of Itarim, which greatly shocked the owner. After a couple of minutes, Suho, Essel, Rocky, and Brocky sat down next to each other, wanting to listen carefully to Bara. The ant flying in front of them decided, with their permission, to tell everything he saw in the demon's memories. However, before he gets to his story, they need to know something important. Stardust has spread across the earth, and the source of the darkness is a monster of the outer world. It turns out that Stardust has spread not only in the demon world, but the source of the darkness is not the monsters from the dungeon. Whether it was a coincidence or not, the demons he ate were connected to the hyena guild that was on that mountain. These demons obtained humans through the guild, subsequently infecting them from the source of darkness and receiving Stardust. Stardust is produced not only in this place, but also in many others. They are called Stardust factories. If we conclude, the guild that kidnapped people and the guild that enslaved those people are closely related. Also, let's not forget about the factory that, with the help of humans, produced Stardust. Itarim was behind all of this. It was clearly somehow connected to the Itarim invasion of Earth, but it all seemed very strange. It was also surprising that there was a person who created this entire Stardust production system. There is an apostle of Itarim who is hiding somewhere on this earth, and a man who helps him in everything. This is the deputy head of the Reaper Guild, Lee Min-sunging, and if they find him, they can learn about the apostle Itarim. Suho decided to find this man in order to try to catch him in direct contact with Itarim. At the same time, a crowd of journalists gathered near the building. waiting for a specific person to emerge from it. A minute later, Lee Min-sung came out, with two bodyguards walking next to him, saving him from reporters. Journalists asked for interviews, asking what happened to the investigation into the Hunters case. Everyone was wondering if it was true that the Hyena Guild had been kidnapping people and that many dead people had been found in the dungeon. Their Guild of Reapers, after the cataclysm that happened 2 years ago, is trying to do everything in their power. And the Hyena Guild's sponsorship was so that their D-rank hunters could serve for the sake of the people. And the field-type dungeon was under their management, since it would be difficult for new guilds to manage it. He never imagined that his well-intentioned actions would be perceived in such a terrible way. If he had paid more attention to this, no one would have gotten hurt, but now all the blame lies with him. Through tears, the man offered his deepest apologies for the disturbance and then headed to the car. The journalist decided that all the accusations were false, because the association said that they were innocent of everything. Everyone was sure that the Reapers Guild worked for the good of the people, so they could be considered true heroes. Min-sung was pleased that he was still in good shape, because acting at this level was nothing for an actor who was among the top performers. He figured that out, but he never thought that the old man from the Hunters Association would send him away without any questioning. But this meant that the association was not yet aware that he was a Stardust distributor. At that very moment, Suho was hiding not far from him, having decided to take a closer look at the man Burr was talking about. However, right now the ant did not sense any connection between this man and Itarim. This could mean that Itarim does not control him, and he does everything according to his own will. Frowning, the guy decided to find out everything as quickly as possible in order to put an end to their stupid plan. But suddenly Bear stopped him, even though he knew that Suho had become several times stronger recently. But this time he will put his own life on the dance and will not allow him to do anything rash. At that very moment, Min-sung turned around sharply, looking at the wall behind which Suho was hiding, and then got into the car. The magical power that emanated from Lee Min-sung wouldn't allow the guy to resist him at his current level. Sometime later, while in the club, Min-sung was looking at his phone, where public opinion towards him had changed dramatically. The news revealed that the Reapers were found innocent and the guild's actions were exposed to the public. At that very moment, a girl entered the room and sarcastically called the man a hero in the world of hunters. Since he came, he should have first told her everything before enjoying his achievements. She sent everyone else out, adding that he didn't have to report everything to her. The girl knew that he had a difficult character because this guy had a silver spoon in his mouth since childhood. In addition, he became a celebrity in his youth, which caused him to develop a huge ego. But even when his pride was trampled, it did not stop him from resolving this problem without any problems. After the disaster, celebrity Min-sung woke up as an A-ranker, which became a widely discussed topic among the public. But his driver, Tae-gyu, turned out to be one of the few S-rank awakened, and their places in the hierarchy changed in the blink of an eye. However, for some reason, Min-sung joined the Reapers, which was created directly by Tae-gyu. Then the girl asked him to tell her in more detail about the Stardust he was currently working with. This time, she wanted to make a large purchase, but the man lost the carriers in one of the factories. However, she did not believe that the deputy did not have some way to arrange supplies for a dear client. Min-sung decided to try to get a hold of his business partner, although he wasn't happy about the fact that he would actually have to look for him. The kid hasn't been listening to him much lately, and as far as he knows, he doesn't need anyone's special permission. Meanwhile, Suho's team hunted goblins to complete their daily quest and level up. The monsters were unable to do anything. They had no choice but to die at the hands of the hunters. When the first horde was behind him, the boy used the flute again to summon the next ones. It seemed to Baru that the gentleman was nervous because of their recent conversation, which was evident from his behavior. Their goal is to gain information about the apostles from Min-seong, but it is dangerous to engage him without being prepared for battle. If he doesn't tell them himself, Burr will simply eat him and test him, because the Lord allowed him to eat people if they are villains. But this is only if you defeat him, because when Bear visited the Hunters Association, he saw many different people. If we estimate the rank based on his sense and strength, the young master is currently a C-rank hunter. Rocky was a D rank and Isel was a C rank, but that was only because she had lost all her powers due to the demon's torture. But when Rocky possesses the younger lord, he barely reaches B rank, which is still no match for Min-sung. There is also a difference in strength between representatives of the same rank, but on average, it takes 10 D ranks to defeat a C rank. This means that they are not yet strong enough to defeat the Reaper Guild and Lee Min-sung with his A rank. While Isil and Burr argued among themselves about why the ant had been demoted from the rank of marshal to private, Suho accepted the reward for the quest. This time, the score doesn't increase even if he defeats many more goblins, and the hidden reward was a one-time thing. Then he decided to open a random box, and the system notified him that he had received an ash ring. It was a D-rank magic item that increased the owner's perception by 5 points. The boy immediately put it on, surprised that the system had given him a piece of equipment again. However, this doesn't really affect the situation, because some 5 perception points won't save him. At some point, he will no longer be able to level up by hunting goblins, because they will run out. And Demon Hunt only increased the damage of Horn of the Volcano by 3%, which isn't particularly noticeable in real combat. Suho wanted to grow faster, but there were not enough funds for this, so he had to go to the dungeon. A little later, looking at the tablet, the guy noticed that today he was only invited to the gathering and extraction teams. A hunter of his rank would certainly never be accepted into a strike force, but entering the gates without permission was considered illegal. He also couldn't undergo re-evaluation at the association, because then this information would be published on the website, which he wouldn't want. The Apostles of Ataramov are on Earth, so it is impossible for them to know about his existence, and he himself became his father's weak spot. He can't even defeat Minsun, and if the Apostles get involved, then victory is definitely out of the question. However, Beer was sure that he didn't need to worry too much about the Apostles now. If they arrived on Earth faster than him, then they are not particularly strong now due to the influence of spatial displacement on them. To move between dimensions, one must pass through a rift, but a rift of music which creates a disturbance. Even if you forcefully widen the rift, it immediately narrows back down, which requires spending a lot of magical power. For this reason, the Itarim army cannot attack this universe, and the ruler can easily get here. It turns out that weaklings who are capable of quickly carrying out spatial movement have arrived here. Now it became clear why they did not show themselves in person, but used Broki and the demons as a labor force. If the Itarims ever invade here, now would be the perfect time for Suho to grow up to prevent that from happening. Bear remembered again how Jin Woo had given him permission to make his own decisions once he arrived there. He then held out the key to the Shadow Dungeon, saying that if she could get help, he could take it to go to him. The man added with a smile that he would definitely help Suho in many ways to protect the land from invaders. This was another reason why the Lord gave him the key, so he decided to use it now. But as soon as Burr wanted to turn to the young master, he suddenly jumped up and screamed, surprising the ant. Taking out his phone, the guy remembered that there was a way to get into the gate unnoticed without breaking the rules of the association. A couple of hours later, Suho was in a tall building where he was met by an acquaintance of his father who was glad to see him. He was curious why the guy suddenly wanted to meet, because he didn't think that he would come here with a business proposal. The man also noticed that Suho had grown a lot, noticing that the guy was offering him a very profitable deal. Beer, who was peeking out from behind his collar, constantly whispered words of praise to the young master. Yu Jin-ho couldn't believe that Suho came to him to help him enter the gate. There was a virtual game that became so popular that it continuously held the top spots in the ratings from the day of its release. Who would have thought that the creator of such an unrivaled game would be an ordinary, immature offspring of a conglomerate family? The name of that game studio was A-Jin, and its CEO was Yu Jin-ho. It was to him that Suho arrived some time ago, where he was met by a secretary to be taken directly to him. The director said that an important guest would be arriving today, so they were ready to receive him properly. The guy found himself within the walls of his uncle's company for the first time, which is why he was surprised by the spacious office and staff. But what surprised him even more was that there were so many awakened people around who had decided to become office workers. The secretary noticed his interest and explained that not all awakened ones like to risk their lives in the dungeons. They can also earn a salary by performing tasks or doing security. There is one project for hunters that their company is working on. They couldn't give him any details, but the guy thought they were just writing a game about hunters. When they reached the right floor, they were immediately met by a middle-aged man who was glad to see the guy. It seemed to him that they had not seen each other for 100 years, and during this time a lot of water had flowed under the bridge, but their relationship had not changed. The last time he heard about his awakening was at the university, and now not only he, but also his aunt is worried about him. Suho countered by saying that he had so many things to do that he couldn't get in touch more often. Jinho noticed that he even managed to grow up, but in fact, this was due to the system's intervention. The guy asked his uncle to look at something, and the uncle was surprised that he got straight to the point before chatting. Picking up the tablet, the man noticed various tables and diagrams, deciding that it was a business proposal. He didn't expect this from Suho, who had truly grown up and was now making him an offer with minimal risk. Jin-ho understood everything, smiling as he realized that he needed his uncle to help him enter the gate. The guy asked to reserve the gate and hire people, and he would give them all the crystals they would get there. The director was surprised that dungeons from D to C rank were within his power, although he himself was an E rank hunter. Jin-ho was also awakened, but even his strength would not be enough to fight inside the gate alone. The idea was akin to suicide, as no hunter in their right mind would go into a dungeon alone. He didn't want to believe that the boy wanted to go there because it was believed that his parents were drawn there during the Great Cataclysm. The man told him not to worry because he was still hiring hunters to look for them, and they just had to wait. Suho knew that the conversation would come down to this, and now he was forced to tell him the truth because he could trust him. Without further ado, the guy announced with all seriousness in his voice that he was awakened and capable of leveling up. Somewhere on Earth, invaders from outer space are hiding, and to stop them, he must kill monsters and level up. Only in this way can he stop the tragedy that will soon affect their land. Therefore, he needs to get into the dungeon at all costs to become stronger. Jin-ho didn't believe a single word he said, "Thank you," had he heard about the project, leveling up alone. Suddenly, the man laughed, because he was sure that today they had a joke on their program about making fun of his uncle. He couldn't understand where the guy got this information from, because it was the hidden plot of their next game. An awakened one who levels alone, starting from the weakest hunters, to eventually surpass S rank. He has a chance to become the strongest awakened and save the world, but before that, he will need to pass many trials. While Jin-ho was wondering who had told him this, Suho guessed that it was his father's story. The man stated that his plan with his subordinates to play a joke on his uncle had failed, asking them to prepare better. But at that very second, Bear appeared, answering that he had vague memories from the past world. Jin-ho, in fear, began asking Suho about this monster, while the guy himself tried to figure out when he managed to get out. Bear said that he was only a pawn in the hands of the ruler, but of all the people, he had seen the most battles. Then the ant picked up the key, deciding that it was easier to do so than to waste time on very long explanations. Without wasting any time, he inserted the key into the man's chest, clarifying that it was a gift from the master. At first, Jin-ho was taken aback to find himself in a completely empty space where there was absolutely nothing. But at that very second, a hunter came out to meet him, in whom he recognized himself, but much younger. The next moment, memories of the time when he fought side by side with Jin-woo flashed through his mind. He saved his life and also helped him when he was in trouble, and Jin-woo was closer to him than a brother. Jin-ho was indebted to his elder brother, as it was thanks to him that he was able to gain his father's approval in his past life. The boy sitting opposite him decided that he would also consider him his little brother. When Jin-ho woke up, tears involuntarily began to flow from his eyes as he tried to comprehend what he had seen. Wiping his face, the man realized that in this world he had met Jin-woo again, and it was clearly his will. Surprised, Suho immediately began asking Bara what he had done to him, but the boy had no reason to worry. The thing was that all his memories from his past life came back, so the man could not contain his emotions. A little later, Jin-ho learned that Jin-woo possessed limitless power, which was partially passed on to his son. It's hard to even imagine that he is protecting the world from the so-called Itarims, and in another dimension at that. To stop the Itarims' imminent invasion of Earth, Suho needs to become stronger as quickly as possible. Even in such a stalemate, he offers his uncle a business proposal, being as pedantic as his father. But now it's time for a man to stop seeing him as just a child and trying to protect him. After which, Jin-ho decided to accept his offer, in response to which he received a joyful cry from the guy. However, Jin-ho, on the contrary, gloomed, thinking that Jin-woo had decided to do everything alone again. But the reason that allowed him to regain his memory is that it gives him a chance to help again as a comrade in arms. Jin-woo could confidently count on Jin-ho because he would do everything possible to help his son. The next day, when the boy reached the gate, he noticed several people who did not look like hunters at all. These were members of the strike force that Uncle hired. He did a great job of filling the required number. However, some doubted that they would be paid 4 million without entering the gate, while the guy would actually go alone. They didn't know how confident he was in his powers, but he shouldn't underestimate the gate. They asked to tell them if the guy felt he needed urgent help, because they were ready to work. Even if some of the hunters looked weak, they could still help in any way they could. Suho merely thanked them and then headed towards the gate, doubting that he would need their help. Father has shouldered a lot of burdens on his own and continues to carry them, so he will do the same. After summoning Isel and Rocky, Suho felt the warmth of his father's intention to protect them. Stone monsters began to appear before them, and they were extremely hostile. Taking a fighting stance, the boy firmly decided that from now on, he could not allow his father to do everything alone. Later in the evening, when Min Song arrived at the building, he immediately asked his subordinate to be ready. 3 months had passed since their last meeting, and now the time had come to visit this mysterious young man again. A man passing by recognized Min Sung, whom he had seen on the news, because you can't escape your own popularity. It was important for him to maintain the right image, so he smiled, showing maximum friendliness. My old man waved back and smiled, saying that he would be rooting for him, the hero of all hunters. As the son of a vice president of a construction company, he made his debut in the entertainment industry at a young age. Later, fate brought him into show business, where he was nicknamed the Prince of Asia. But after the cataclysm, he made a name for himself as an awakened A-rankin. It turned out that the golden times would never end, but at that moment his driver reported that he had awakened as an S-rank. He was getting a bit old, so he was thinking of becoming a hunter, so he would soon stop carrying him. At a meeting with the Hunters Association, they asked him to create his own guild, so he decided to invite Min Sung. The man didn't understand how an ordinary driver could get an S rank when a person like him awakened as an A rank. From that day on, it seemed to him that something was wrong with this world, and everything very quickly turned upside down. The entire social hierarchy was turned upside down after a lousy cataclysm, and he was obliged to restore it. Even if he had to get his hands dirty working with demons, he had to get what was his. Looking at the strange people, he advised them to stop grinning. I began, he will remove them by force. He wondered where their boss was, who hadn't even deigned to greet him personally. Walking a little further and hearing his name, he noticed a child with a familiar hair color and a nasty look. He always thought that this boy was an alien because of his unusual appearance, who was now reading a book. The boy had grown a lot since their last meeting, even though he remembered him as a very small child, and his mana reserves had also increased. But the boy had already said that he was not growing, but was regaining his lost strength after moving to Earth. To avoid problems with interdimensional travel, he had to break his main form into pieces. The first fragment to arrive, it was in infancy, the weakest of them, so it arrived faster. After the second fragment arrived and merged with it, the current him appeared, who is now standing in front of him. His memories remained, but his personality had changed from the one he knew not long ago. Min Sung thought it was too difficult, but he simply had to not be nice to him. However, the man was not interested in his identity. Instead, he reminded him of the promise he had made to him. The boy remembered fame, fortune, and also the murder of S-rank hunter Lim Tai-gyu, which made Min Sung smile. He was satisfied with this answer, after which he heard the question of what brought him to it. Min Sung was surprised that now he couldn't even come into his own house, but the boy asked him not to come with any little things. There was a problem with the production of Stardust now because the Hyena Guild and the factory at Seoul Station were destroyed. He wanted to come back for more, but the boy wondered if it was an ambush and if they found out the reason. It was known that the hyenas were destroyed by a hunter in a black mask, although Min Song assured that there would be no problems with the distribution system. The man brushed it off by saying that nothing would come of it if he got hung up on such trifles. However, this behavior looked incompetent and was a mistake by the boy's previous personality to choose him as its pawn. At that very moment, Min Sung pulled out a hidden knife and then, with incredible speed, put it to the child's throat. He didn't like being compared to the idiots under his control because he was an A-rank hunter who could kill him. Now he could do this before his strength returned and he didn't consider himself his pawn. The awakened judge themselves solely by their mana reserves, and this seems to be an indicator of their strength. The next second, the boy used his ability, subjugating all the people in the building. Min Sung was shocked to see his mana begin to spread everywhere. He couldn't believe that this kid had brainwashed every single person in the building, and now they were all under his control. The reason the boy's previous personality deemed him necessary was for survival. Now he has the power to survive, and their relationship may change depending on Min Sung's competence. At this time, all the subordinates in the room turned their gaze to the man, starting to take out their available weapons. Throwing the knife aside, Min Sung decided to play it off as a joke, as he was simply testing whether he could kill an S rank. Having closed the book, the boy, with a smug look, decided to solve it until the moment when it was useful. He then presented him with stimulants that were made by condensing stardust 100 times. The man was pleasantly surprised by the product, because if you dilute it, you can get a huge amount of dust. True, the effect is different from what low-ranking hunters use, and it appears even in A-rankers like him. Min Sung didn't dare to use something he knew nothing about because it could contain danger. He may have unleashed an unimaginable monster, but that was no longer his business. All that mattered to him was the boy's promise. As the man left the building, the apostle threw the book aside, sensing that another fragment would soon arrive. Once he absorbs the power fragment, he will no longer need to hide and will be able to get down to business. At the same time, Suho and his team were fighting a huge snake whose scales were armored. While Essel and Rocky distracted him, the boy jumped, grabbing the snake's neck almost at its mouth. His comrades watched him with concern, but the hunter showed that he had everything under control. Using all his strength, Suho was able to crush the reptile's neck with his bare hands, causing it to writhe in pain. While the boy was fighting, the apostle waited for the time to come for the real invasion of the Itarims. Meanwhile, one of the members of Suho's combat squad became curious as to whether it was really dangerous. Each of them will get 5 million just for sitting here on their asses until this man comes out of the gate. And they explained that this was their 4th time accompanying him and that they were paid on time, but the girl still thought that something was wrong. She was offered to give up this business, after which she hesitated because the offer was too generous. The others also have suspicions because the boys do not take ore mining squads of collectors with them to clear the gates. At first, he only protected the D-rank gates, but now he's taken on the C-rank ones as well, and it's unclear what he's doing there. Meanwhile, the goblins were furiously swinging their pickaxes mining ore while Burr urged them to work harder. Essil, who was collecting with Rocky, believed that this required special skills. At that very moment, she thought that Suho had decided to take down the boss alone, and she hoped that nothing would happen to him. Suho himself was already actively fighting the monster, dodging each of its deadly attacks. The boy gripped the dagger tighter and used a storm cut to avoid injuring the spider. He had hoped to activate the paralysis skill, but the target had high resistance, causing the effect to be weakened. The guy had been looking for a way to test the dagger effect for a long time, but it didn't work on spiders. Then he threw the dagger straight into the monster's face, thereby distracting it from the main attack. When the boss looked away, Suho suddenly rose into the air, then clenched his fist, pointing it at the monster. The blow was so strong that it broke the spider's jaw, causing it to immediately become disoriented. He had enough power to fight a C-rank boss on his own, which meant a B-rank gate was next. He is now more comfortable using the ruler's power in battle, and he was able to not only increase his level, but also become a better fighter. Suddenly, he thought about using the ruler's power not for telekinesis, but to impose an invisible hand on his attacks. Without thinking twice, he flew up again to find the insect's weak spot while simultaneously distracting it. He gathered all his strength to deliver a decisive blow, thereby wanting to confirm his theory. The guy abruptly changed his trajectory, using his skill, and then flew like a bullet towards the monster, trampling it into the ground. When the monster was defeated, the system immediately notified about it. And in addition to this, the guy leveled up. The ruler's power was also improved, but it required much more concentration, which quickly exhausted Suho. A few minutes later, Essil and Rocky looked in surprise at the gentleman who emerged from the depths of the dungeon. At that time, the guy thought that only with him his possibilities during a fight were truly limitless. He managed to kill the boss alone, while the gathering team also finished the job, and Bear was munching on mana stones. The girl reported that they had collected all the materials from the monsters, having done an excellent job. After opening the shop, Suho immediately began selling the materials they had collected, receiving gold in return. Beer noticed that compared to human hunters, the Lord was now closer to a B-rank hunter. And also, if he becomes stronger, then Essil and Rocky too, because their powers began to recover faster. The girl also became interested in how she could restore her strength without consuming blood. At that moment, Suho was surprised to notice that he could now see their levels. Essil was level 19 and Rocky was 17. The girl didn't understand how she was leveling up, because they weren't players like Mr. Jin Woo or Suho. They cannot distribute stat points, but can still become stronger through leveling up. At that very moment, the guy suggested checking whether they could increase their level, which interested his comrades. But they couldn't do this after visiting several raids. However, they had already visited 2 today. After entering the Shadow Dungeon, Suho decided to put them aside for a while and take up the daily quest. But as soon as they passed through the portal, they were surprised to notice a strange gate of an unusual red color. They could not understand where the gates in the Shadow Dungeon came from, and from which the unbearable heat emanated. The guy decided to ask Beer about this, but he couldn't find an answer, covering his face from the heat. Suddenly, the system announced that an urgent quest had appeared related to a spatial rift. Suho was surprised, as he had never encountered urgent quests before, but this only made him more excited. Without thinking twice, the guy bought some heat-resistant capes in the store, after which he handed them over to Isil and Rocky. He was just thinking about another raid, so he decided that they were very lucky, and then invited everyone forward. At this time, a skirmish broke out between two groups of hunters in the Egyptian field dungeon of the pyramid. Ryo Singh of the Asura Guild was a B-rank hunter and was currently in a very difficult situation. But he couldn't believe that they came here first, but another group simply asks them to leave the dungeon. The huge man with the scar on his face showed little interest in his statement, giving him a final warning. This field dungeon is under the control of their guilds, so any disobedience will be taken as a declaration of war. It was unpleasant for Ryo to realize that they were now facing the Scavenger Guild. Randolph, who was an A-rank hunter, was convinced that everything lost its meaning in the face of absolute power. However, Ryo had no intention of retreating and ordered his comrades to prepare for battle. The other side was not going to give up so easily, so they began to do the same, drawing their weapons. Suddenly, all their concentration was broken by a guy who waved his hand, drawing their attention to himself. Turning around, they noticed three people, one of whom was asking in common language where he was. 30 minutes ago, Suho realized why there was no more sand, because they ended up in a desert area. Beer felt a strong magic emanating from the pyramid that stood majestically before them. They also noticed foreign objects that did not fit in with the ancient ruins. They headed towards the cars and the wire fences that someone had used to cordon off the area. The machines didn't work inside the dungeons, but they were still there, so maybe it wasn't a dungeon at all. Judging by the guild's coat of arms, they could have accidentally been transported to the other side of the world, which at first turned out to be impossible. But as long as the original gate remains in the Shadow Dungeon, there won't be any problems, so we need to check everything quickly. The next second, the guy decided to go back by opening a portal, but when he returned, he was stunned. Meanwhile, his strike team noticed that the gate was disappearing. The boss was dead, but he had not yet come out. Currently, Suho was caught between two fires of different guilds that were about to kill each other. They entered the pyramid, but found people here, and it was probably they who brought the cars here. When I heard their conversation a long time ago, I realized that they were speaking English, which means he was in another country. It was no wonder he had studied English while preparing for university, which meant he could talk to them a little. Ryo was surprised that even the East had decided to claim ownership of this dungeon. Randolph found the events unfolding too troublesome, because he did not know that so many worms were burrowing around here. He remembered what the guild leader had told him about his grandmother's prophecy. At the gates of the tomb, life will emerge from the broken seal, born from death and capable of controlling the dead. And immediately after her words, a pyramid, a field-type dungeon, appeared in Egypt, an extremely fortunate coincidence. They needed to capture this dungeon, and then he would visit it with a raid. And if other guilds decide to intervene, everything must be done in the best scavenger style. Therefore, the man decided to give Suho a warning. If he left right now, he would be released calmly. He was in an aggressive mood, so the guy simply needed to capture the dungeon to complete the quest. At first, everything seemed quite simple, but the man suddenly and abruptly rushed to attack him. Suho, who was already in full combat readiness, said that he asked for it. Changing direction abruptly, he aimed his fist straight at Randolph's chest, dealing a powerful blow. It was difficult to predict how powerful his attacks would be, since the blow would hit his armor, so he wouldn't die. However, his blow was weaker than he thought, because the man immediately hit him in the face, sending him flying into the wall. The man was unhappy that they had decided to underestimate him, after which he gave the order to kill the Asura clan and the narrow-eyed boy. Isil and Rocky immediately prepared for a fight, because this man dared to attack the young ruler. Meanwhile, Suho slowly began to come to his senses, trying to comprehend the strength of his opponent. Hunters can't help but fight among themselves, but to complete the quest, they will have to defeat them all. Now he was sure that this man's guild was his enemy, which needed to be dealt with as soon as possible. At that very second, Suho took off and began to pick up speed, after which he decided to attack one of the hunters. This man couldn't have imagined that some weakling hunter would go against the Scavengers Guild. Suho tried to knock him out, but he held on, making him wonder how strong they were. Suddenly, he decided to use the ruler's power, as was done against the spider in the dungeon. But if he accidentally kills him, there will be a lot of problems later, so everything needs to be done carefully. And while the guy was thinking about this, a man appeared in front of him and immediately cut his opponent's throat. Rio did it because he saw the boy's ability when he dodged Randolph's attack. However, now he was overcome with doubts, so he concluded that the guy was simply afraid to kill. Monsters aren't the only threat a hunter faces. They must also be prepared to fight the false ranks. Suho thought he was already prepared to fight for his life, but that was not enough. He hadn't felt the need to kill until now. Even in a battle with hyenas, he could have done things more gently. After all, situations where either you kill or someone else kills you, or where protection consists of killing, will continue to haunt him. They flew out of my head because all thoughts were about raising the level, which until today was a mistake. We need to discard our way of thinking, which was formed before the cataclysm, and live by new laws. This way, he could become someone who could fight Lee Min-sung, who was now much stronger. At this time, Ryo Singh introduced himself to the boy, naming his guild, hinting at camaraderie. They're both in a tough spot because of the scavengers, so it's best to team up. Suho took a risk and swung his fist at him, but to the man's surprise, he passed by, disposing of his opponent. This blow was many times stronger due to the ruler's power, and the guy decided not to hesitate to strike now. Randolph was surprised to see that this kid had practically killed a B-rank tank with one hit. Meanwhile, Suho looked at him and introduced himself, after which he also proposed joining forces. The scavengers noticed that the Asura Guild was cooperating with another group of hunters, but this did not stop them. Even if small fish unite, they still remain small fish. They believed that their fighting ability was superior, but Suho had not yet used his full power. After that, he began to summon shadow soldiers, among which a giant arachnite private appeared. Along with her came other dangerous shadows, which he had subdued when he cleared the last gate. Ryo was shocked that he, a summoner with such combat skills, could summon so many creatures at once. At that very moment, the spider rushed into battle, causing the scavenger tanks to begin forming a defensive wall. No time to waste, Randolph is back in action to destroy the surprise monster with one blow. However, he didn't stop there, and then headed towards the guy who was hiding a lot. The spider became weaker when he turned into a soldier, but he was still able to be defeated with one blow. This person was the strongest here, so Suho hurried to use the communication skill with Rocky. But at that very second, Essel stopped him, which is why the guy had to be temporarily distracted. The girl suggested using the communication skill with her this time, since they learned the secret of how to increase the charge coefficient in the gate. However, it was questionable to use a skill they had never trained before in a real fight. Suddenly, there was a noise behind her and a crowd of monsters began to pour out of the pyramid. People assumed that they had come because of the noise of the battle they had staged here. There were also monsters crowding from the other entrance, so now all the hunters had to fight together. Seeing the living dead, Randolph only now understood the prophecy the boss had heard. The broken seal, born from the death of life, will appear in the grave, and it will have the power to raise the dead. If the dead that were raised are those mummies, then the one spoken of is definitely in that underground place. The boss ordered to take away the right to own this dungeon, so it's best to take away the power that can raise the dead. However, deep down, he didn't want to retreat right now, because he noticed an interesting person who was currently fighting. Eventually, the man decided to ignore the other hunters and go to the boss's room. Ryo shouted loudly to his comrades that the scavengers were entering the dungeon and they had to be stopped. However, their way was blocked by the dead, who began to press on them from all sides. They were restricting them with monsters, and the passage was on the other side. At that very moment, Suho teamed up with Rocky, taking on the biggest dead man. Having dodged a couple of slow attacks, the guy easily destroyed him and the zombies standing nearby. The guy suggested that we also quickly sort this out and follow the scavengers. Ryo looked at the guy in shock, with difficulty opening the door that he not only summons, but also unites. Meanwhile, Randolph looked at the next defeated zombie, but he was overcome with doubts. This boy was definitely hiding something, and he wanted to fight him once after gaining the power to raise the dead. However, right now they might be in the boss's room, which should be the main problem. When they opened the doors, they discovered a creature that was bound with many chains. The hunters assumed he was sleeping, so they decided to act as quietly as possible. He was chained, but the prophecy said that life born from death would appear after the seal was broken. Suddenly, the monster raised its head slightly and began to say something in a previously unknown language. The hunters immediately guessed that it was the language of monsters, but they did not expect it to speak to them. Realizing that people did not understand him, the monster immediately strained his hands to try to get rid of the chains. Randolph immediately ordered everyone to prepare for battle because the boss wanted to get out. At that very second, the chains began to make a loud ringing sound, breaking out of the walls and attacking the hunters. Many did not have time to react and put up shields, which is why they were immediately defeated by one sharp blow. Just a moment later, only one man remained alive who managed to put up a shield in time. This monster destroyed their tanks, known for their resilience, with one swing of its chains. Suddenly, the creature screamed loudly, which briefly disconcerted Randolph. Perhaps the monster was asking him to attack, but both of them were looking down on him. The next second, the man decided to use the giant armor skill to increase his defense. Without wasting any time, he tried to attack the monster, which began to spin its chains again. However, from the blow in which he used all his strength, the monster did not even move or show any signs of pain. Meanwhile, the creature continued to say something. As it turned out, he was apologizing to the master. He needed to wait for him before freeing himself from the shackles, but now he had no choice. Sharply releasing part of its strength, the monster threw the man upward, thereby finally defeating him. The monster didn't expect that the first living creature he met would break down immediately after their game. It wasn't scary, because somewhere near the exit, there was still someone alive with whom I could play a little. Meanwhile, there was no end in sight to the dead outside, but it didn't matter how many Suho took with him. He decided to resurrect those dead people, but the system reported that the old souls could not be extracted. It was a shame that this ability didn't work on mummies, and this thing had far more limitations than he thought. Suddenly, the ground beneath the hunters began to shake and crumble, throwing everyone off balance. The next second, huge centipedes appeared in front of them, which were more dangerous than mummies. Then an even more furious battle began, during which Essel decided to attack the insect. However, her spear was unable to pierce the monster's shell, causing her attack to fail. Rio couldn't believe they had given up ownership of the dungeon to the Scavenger Guild, but they had to retreat. But the quest description talks about finding the reason behind the gate, and it's unclear whether the quest will end if you kill the boss. Suddenly, another monster appeared not far from them, which attracted the attention of all the hunters. It was the same prisoner who had emerged from the depths of the dungeon and was now slowly making his way out. It was this passage that the Scavenger Guild used, but a new monster appeared from it. Perhaps it was Suho's perception that had increased with his level, but he could definitely feel it now. It was clearly the dungeon boss trapped in the tomb, Amit, whose name was glowing red. Suddenly, the monster ordered all the mummies to disappear, which caused them to immediately obey their master's order. Azel was stunned that the monster's voice ordered them to leave, and the mummies actually retreated. She wanted to say something else, but Amit landed abruptly in front of her, silencing her. The boss was surprised that she understood him, but the girl replied that she was a demon first and foremost. After facing countless undead creatures day after day and burrowing insects, he didn't expect to be able to communicate with anyone. Asil was surprised that he was more friendly than he seemed, but at that time she was attacked by a centipede. Amit decided that this creature would not interfere with their conversation, and then destroyed it with one wave of his hand. The girl looked at this picture in shock, unable to believe that he had killed the centipede with one blow. The boss said that before the conversation he would kill the bugs that don't even understand the simplest command to get out. The next second, he soared into the air, starting to destroy the insects one by one without any problems. The other hunters had a hard time comprehending what was happening, as they didn't know whether to be happy that the monster was helping them. This was the first time Suho saw a monster kill its own kind, because he always thought it was impossible. Meanwhile, the centipedes tried to attack the boss, even despite the death of their own kind. One of them managed to eat Amit, but immediately regretted it when he began to break out from the inside. The boss hated insects, so he was pleased that he could destroy them in this way. The hunters who stood to the side did not even dare to breathe, looking at what was happening. Rio didn't understand why such a monster would appear here, since the dungeon should have been C or B rank. Looking in his direction, Amit decided that no one would talk to him here either, which upset him greatly. Having dealt with the centipedes, he decided to attack the hunters who were uninvited guests here. The man put out his swords to defend himself, but at that very moment a guy came to his aid and threw the boss back. The guy didn't understand such principles, to kill just because they didn't understand him. Amit was pleasantly surprised that there was actually someone he could chat with. However, he didn't care about principles, so he counterattacked sharply, hitting Suho right on the head. The impact was so strong that it raised a curtain of dust, and the guy was thrown with force into the opposite wall. Ezel screamed loudly, asking the monster how he dared to attack the young lord, which surprised him. It was hard to call it an apology, but he decided not to kill her because she might know something. He wondered if the war between the Shadow Monarch and the others was over, and who had emerged victorious. Ezel became curious about the monster that knew about the War of the Monarchs, and he continued to demand an answer. At this time, the girl looked at Suho and Rocky, who were unconscious. Amut was unhappy that human beings did not understand him, and the demon refused to answer. No matter what reason they had for doing this, they were now about to die at his hands. The boss wanted to finish off Isel, but Suho accepted the reward of restoring his status in time. He was very lucky that he had held on to the reward for the daily quest, and now he could tell the monsters about the War of the Monarchs. With a smile, he stated that all the monarchies had been killed by the Shadow Monarch, thereby stunning Amit. While he was imprisoned, the war ended, and judging by the questions, he is one of the subordinates of another monarch. This is a crocodile face of at least S rank. You definitely shouldn't spill it, because you'll die on the spot. The monster tried to comprehend that the Shadow Monarch had ultimately won, and thought about the death of the others. Suddenly, he became angry when he realized that she, the iron-bodied Tarnak, had also fallen by his hand. It wasn't hard to guess that Amit was a supporter of the Iron Body Monarch, since he was asking only about him. The guy didn't really like this turn of events because it promised a lot of problems. Amit might get very angry if he found out whose son he was, but the monster had already swung its leg at him. Isel screamed hysterically as she watched the monster's foot land on the spot where the boy had just stood. The guy dodged, but the monster said that he was reacting slowly, which meant he was lying, and then asked him not to hesitate. This bastard had simple conditions for the murder, but he asked again if the monarch of the Iron Body died by his hand. Suho hoped that he would not go berserk upon learning of the monarch's death, and then answered in the affirmative. But at that very second he shuddered, felt a terrible force, while Amit agreed that the monarch would stop visiting them. So in the end he died, and he had the Shadow Monarch to thank for it, after which Amit laughed. Suho was surprised that the monster was not a subordinate of the Iron Body Monarch. He was also surprised by such nonsense, after which he swung his fist, wanting to deliver a fatal blow. The boy put his hands out in defense, but suddenly discovered that the monster was stopped by the chains that bound his hands. Amut realized that he had crossed the border, which is why he could not go further, so the guy remained safe. As the chains began to drag him back into the dungeon, the monster began to curse Tarnak and the sorcerer. Suho watched in shock as the chains appeared out of nowhere and dragged the monster away. He didn't understand what happened here, but they were definitely lucky that they didn't have to fight this monster. Now that they know about the existence of this monster, they need to act with caution and provide first aid to everyone. Suddenly, the guy shuddered, felt that something was happening with the quest, and notifications started glitching. Noticing the gentleman's unusual behavior, the girl decided to ask what was going on. As it turned out, they now needed to enter the gate and free the descendant of the Iron Body from the pyramid. When they entered the dungeon, this was noticed by the guys from the Scavengers Guild who were dealt with by Amit. Suddenly, the chained monster spoke up, saying that he, as a human, had plenty of courage to come and visit him. However, this time, he came to have a normal conversation, because killing someone on a momentary whim does not sound like a normal conversation. However, this is the only thing that Tarnak taught him, and if he wants to look for the guilty, then let him blame that dead degenerate. Suho seemed to be looking at a cruel, yet honest child, whom he was supposed to take as his ally. Amit decided that since his body was chained and he had nothing better to do, he would tell him. He was a creature created by the Iron Body Monarch and a magic caster who was eventually banished to this tomb. They transformed him from an ordinary man into a horrific monster. Now he is thrown into a tomb filled with death and bound with pitiful chains. Even if they were broken, they would reappear as soon as he crossed the border, and because of them, he couldn't even reach the depths of the tomb. He cannot forgive Tarnak and the sorcerer for the pain they caused him with their antics. Now, the guy's task was to free Amit, and something had to be done with his chains. But how can we get rid of something that keeps appearing again? If it's the hooks, then Amit would have done something about them long ago. Suddenly, he decided to clarify with the monster that there were monsters here before he was sealed. This means that he is not the owner of the dungeon, and the guy needed to find the large iron door where the boss was located. But it was unclear what the problem was with allowing Amit to wander around here freely, instead of locking him in the confines of one room. If his assumptions are correct, then he can help him get out, in exchange for any request he makes. The monster agreed to do everything for freedom, but did not expect that the guy had a way to get rid of this magic. However, if this person decides to joke with him, the consequences may be irreversible. From these thoughts, his chains began to crack and crumble, and anger began to fill Amit's soul. Suho hastened to calm him down, asking him to listen first as he sincerely wanted to help him. After this, the guy announced that he would destroy the entire dungeon, which greatly surprised the descendant of the steel body. He can't go deeper into the dungeon because the caster didn't want him to kill the boss there. But Suho will kill him and destroy the dungeon, because what will happen to the hooks that have lost their fastening? The chains would be of no use if the hooks did not perform their functions. Amit found this thought amusing. When the boy left, he left Burr alone with Amit, who was asked to stop flying around like an annoying fly. The monster still couldn't believe that this child would turn out to be the son of the Shadow Monarch. But he cannot go further, because a lot of time has passed since the descendant of Shadows left. If he couldn't defeat the Dungeon Master, then the plan would fail and the chains would continue to bind him. And yet his words gave him confidence. This guy, although weaker, spoke as if the problem had already been solved. The next second the monster lowered his head, remembering the one who brought him to this place. Tarnak created him, saying that the strength of the flesh is true strength, but even so, a creature weaker than him was able to resist. At that very second, he sincerely believed that these guys could really get him out of here. Meanwhile, Suho was still fighting with the boss's pawns, which were simply of incredible size. And now before them remained the last one, the very same master who sat on the throne. The name of the tomb guardian, Sika, glowed red, which only proved his immense power. A little earlier, Amit stood in front of the portal to the Shadow Dungeon, but the chains prevented him from entering it. Even the thought of leaving this place would call them back, which made this spell very unpleasant. But now they had two primary tasks: to destroy the boss and the entire dungeon along with him, and then get rid of the original function of the chains by breaking their base, thereby freeing Amit. Once they deal with them, the freed monsters along with Beru will join them. And if they failed even one task, there was nothing else to count on. But Suho had a backup plan for that case. Amut decided that come what may, because whatever happened, it would be better than rotting here alone. And now, the dungeon boss began his attack, wanting to destroy the uninvited guests. As a loud magical explosion resounded, Suho cleared away the curtain of dust and rushed forward to attack. He used a storm cut on the sand that had been chasing him all this time, trying to bury it within itself. The sands prevented anyone from approaching the tomb's guardian, and most likely his rank was A no less. At this rate, he will lose his mana faster than him, so we need to deal with him as soon as possible. As the sands began to envelop him, Suho used his ruler's power to direct the spear thrown by Isel. The boss deflected the weapon, but that second was enough to distract him for a short while. The next second, the guy called on the girl to use the allied skill that the girl had been waiting for so long. As they began clearing the gate, they learned that absorbing the soul of a slain monster would charge their collaborative skill. And now, she wants to show him what she learned while fighting hordes of goblins in the Shadow Dungeon. Isil began to share her power with Suho, enveloping him in demonic energy as he moved towards the monster. But a second later, all the girl's pathos disappeared as she fell unconscious to the ground. The demonic strike's charge was now at 67%, which is why the guy decided to put all his power into one strike. Returning from the boss's fist, Suho managed to deliver his own blow directly to the body, after which a deafening explosion was heard. Amut and Bear, who were very far away from them, felt the shaking, thinking that they were finished. The dungeon began to collapse, which meant that he had managed to defeat the dungeon's master. Looking up, they noticed that the hooks that held the chains to the walls were beginning to crumble. At that very moment, the ant led the crocodile along, heading towards the young ruler. Amut still couldn't believe that the chains were no longer holding him and that he was finally free from Tarnak. But it was unclear why they chose him for their experiments, and all that remained were just memories of that time. Tarnak tormented his flesh endlessly, and the sorcerer restored it again, and over time his body truly grew stronger. But his mind, unable to cope with the pain, changed, and in despair he tore out his eyes, finding pleasure in the pain. Immersing himself in it, he only wanted to feel again the grace of nature that he had seen in his youth. And while he retains his sanity, he must remember that he did not become this way of his own free will. Suddenly, one of the hooks flew purposefully towards him, piercing him straight into the side. The other hooks also started flying in his direction, and they decided that it was better to kill him than to let him go. Suddenly, Suho came to his aid and began to fight off the approaching hooks at high speed. The blows were too strong, and his muscles became overstrained, causing blood to immediately gush from his legs. Then the guy decided that he would have to rip them out along with the hooks, simultaneously opening a portal to the Shadow Dungeon. Suho immediately jumped inside, and the hooks rushed after him, rising high above the terrain. At this time, Amit tried to understand why the guy needed this, and why he was shedding blood for him. Suddenly the boy felt pain, because his bones couldn't cope with the load, but at that very second the monster came to his aid. Then the monster realized, looking at the young boy, why all the monarchs lost to the shadow monarch. Amot, who was pierced by one of the hooks, wondered if throwing the hooks into the gate would be enough. After that, he suggested that we work together to the fullest in order to get rid of this magic with our combined efforts. At first, he wanted to call him by name, but changed his mind and addressed him as the young lord. After some time, Bear flew up to Essel, who had just woken up and who noticed that she was in a shadowy dungeon. Suho sent her away first because she was out of energy, but the ant asked her to be quiet. In response to the girl's questioning look, the ant explained that they were resting, which made her smile. Looking up, she noticed Suho and Amit, who had become allies and the urgent quest had been completed. At the same time, in the Hunters Association, the president was sitting at the table and looking at a photograph of a comrade. The Gates and Hunters began to appear again, but thanks to the memories from the past world, he was able to quickly organize an association. The existence of Stardust means that something that did not happen in the past world is happening now. It can increase the mana of several ranked hunters, and it is produced by Lee Min-seung, but that's all they know. It was doubtful that he was capable of doing work of such magnitude alone, and there was a real culprit behind all this. At that very moment, he received a call from a man who had been invaluable in helping the Hunters Association in its formative years. That man was Yu Jin-ho, who asked the president for help regarding his nephew. With tears in his eyes, he shouted that the boy had recently awakened as a hunter and was now trapped in the gate. The man asked Jin Chul to help him, while the president immediately understood which nephew was being talked about. When this realization came to him, the man jumped up abruptly, realizing that something terrible could have happened to Suho. Meanwhile, the members of the Asura Guild squad sat in the car catching their breath after the battle. At that very moment, Ryo was awakened by a smiling boy, whom he immediately recognized as Suho. He announced that the dungeon had been cleared, and then asked to borrow his phone for a minute. When they returned to Korea, Ryo thanked him for his help, and the boy thanked them for the return ticket. They also helped him contact his uncle, who couldn't believe he had gone to Egypt for the gate. My uncle told his friend from the association and hunters about this, and it's worth visiting him in the near future. Ryo was surprised that the S-rank monster escaped and even allowed the dungeon to be destroyed. The boy decided not to tell him what exactly happened to Amit, so he simply shared his joy. Ultimately, he was unable to get rid of the chains, and because of them, he will not be able to leave the Shadow Dungeon. And since he failed to remove the seal, the monster also has the right not to fulfill his promise. But he asked him not to worry, say, because he only needed to free him from the tomb. It seems that with the hooks now scattered everywhere, his range of movement has increased significantly. It was much more comfortable than being cramped in a tiny tomb, and the guy noticed that he had changed. Suddenly, the monster grabbed the gentleman and then flew to the roof to talk in private. That sense of the grandeur of nature that he so lacked, he can feel here again. Now, Amit was ready to follow the guy as he promised, because he was able to free him. Because of the open gates in the Shadow Dungeon and an urgent quest, fate itself probably brought him together with Amit. Meanwhile, Ryo pondered Suho's ability to summon monsters, fight, and even transform while remaining a B rank. He wanted to contact his guild and ask them to dig up more information on him. Suho managed to raise 7 whole levels on the boss and urgent quest, and now he could easily reach A rank. This means that his preparation is almost complete, and he will soon have to fight Lee Min-seung. The time has come for a counterattack against the Apostle of Itarim, who had lived with impunity until now. Meanwhile, the Knights Guild was discussing how they had grown a lot recently. Now they are already laying claim to the B-rank gate, and their office is now much larger. It was all thanks to the Stardust that helped the C-rank hunters enter the B-rank gate. It was already being traded on the black market, and the price had also dropped, but some people thought there was something fishy about it. They also heard that hunters' associations were trying to push through a law banning Stardust. It was strange, because it would be more profitable to give them to the hunters so that they could clear out even more gates. Although they shouldn't give a damn about small fry like them, so I couldn't complain as much as I wanted. At that very moment, several men turned their attention to the door, noticing people there who did not belong to the guild. The first to enter the room was a boy with an unusual appearance, followed by a pretty girl and a huge man. The apostle sternly asked the entire guild if they owned the rights to the gate in Inshin. The strongest hunter explained that this was the Knights Guild, but the guy again demanded that the gate be given to him. When he repeated his request for the 3rd time, the hunter felt a strange surge of magical power. The hunter's subordinates agreed to the apostle's demands, while Song Su couldn't believe what was happening. He began to ask why they jumped up and bowed to him. The boy was surprised that there were hunters left who had not consumed the stardust. After which he announced that from that moment on, they were all forbidden to see and hear, after which everyone closed their eyes and ears. The hunter didn't understand why everyone was pandering to the boy's words, but he just wanted to talk to someone other than that freak. Their creator wishes to possess a world without a master, and he has come here to fulfill his wish. Song-Soo reached for his weapon as the apostle spoke of having questions after arriving. All things are created to fulfill the wishes of their creator, but people have other goals and move according to their own will. The man didn't understand what he was talking about, after which she pulled out her sword and ordered everyone to return to normal. Even if he is a child, he is not allowed to do whatever he wants by making such jokes. But he immediately stopped short when the boy began to emit energy, asking if he had just spoken ill of his creator. However, this did not frighten the hunter, after which he rushed into battle wanting to stop the strange boy. Using the enhancement, the apostle became several times faster, after which, with one blow, he cut the hunter in two. Song-Soo's broken blade hit the forehead of the hypnotized subordinate, but no one paid attention to it. The apostle again allowed everyone to see and hear again, after which he ordered that the place be cleaned up. Walking down the corridor, he noticed other hunters who had gathered at the noise and decided that some hunter had gone berserk. Walking past them, the boy ordered them to forget everything they had seen, without even looking in their direction. It was not their free will, because everything that exists was created to fulfill the desires of their creator. However, the creation of the creator of this universe killed him of their own free will, which seemed contradictory. Sometime later, while in the dungeon, the boy stood in front of the defeated monster, which was still alive. Now it was better to call him a spatial fugitive wandering through the rift. Life must be full of suffering when, having lost his home, he is forced to wander here, but he is ready to give it a chance to win back. Having driven a stone into him, the apostle gave him the order to get out of here and rage as his heart desired. The apostle wanted to explore this world more, doing so for the sake of fulfilling the wishes of their great creator. Meanwhile, the people from the association arrived at the red gate and began checking the amount of mana coming out of the gate. If the boss wasn't dealt with, a breakthrough into the dungeons could happen at any moment. And besides, this was an unfortunate location. But, by order of the apostle, they will inform the association that there are no problems and it is completely safe here. After a short time, the gates began to crack and monsters began to slowly emerge from them. A creation exists only to flawlessly fulfill the will of its creators. As soon as the creator complained about boredom, they immediately entered into battles with each other. Let him desire anything, and they will fulfill his desires by any means necessary, because that is the reason for their existence. However, one of their relatives died in another dimension, and they needed to gain power over the world that had lost its master. Obeying God's will, they gathered countless pilgrims from their world, after which a huge army set out on a campaign against the world that had lost its master. True, they needed a huge amount of energy to transport the countless army to another dimension. However, the interdimensional corridor became narrower the more energy the creature possessed. It would have taken an eternity for the army to cross, but their will was unbreakable, so they found themselves in this world. But something unexpected awaited them there, something so strong that it could fight them back. They encountered the darkness itself, which went against their light, preventing them from entering a new world without a master. It was an abyss of darkness without end or edge, which the power of the dead used to fight the army. Various creatures that had long since perished have once again entered into war against God's creations. The darkness and its spawn possessed a frantic power that was incredibly difficult to cope with. But as soon as a warrior of God fell in battle with the darkness, their former brother-in-arms would rise up and turn against them. The battle continued, their losses grew, and the forces of darkness only continued to increase their strength. God's army found itself in a difficult situation until the war went beyond its dimension. This darkness did everything possible to prevent them from entering the world that had lost its master. And when God's army sank into despair, unable to resist the darkness, God's messenger offered something. They had a great opportunity because the darkness that left the world would have a hard time just like they had in their time. He cannot easily return to his world due to the excessive amount of mana that he did not find in the life forms of this world. The first to enter were the flame spawn, who were weak but capable of infecting creatures without mana with flame. And the army believed that if they spread the faith in this world, the number of believers would increase. With the help of such a sanctuary, they would be able to perform the miracle they had been longing for, which is why everyone agreed with this strategy. Thiel immediately divided his powers and skills into 5 fragments to personally enter this world. and the weakest of them took the beginnings of the flame's offspring and headed into the world that had lost its master. As expected, the weak fragment was not noticed by the darkness, and it managed to penetrate into this world without any problems. However, the fragment encountered an unexpected change that was not part of its plans. Beings supposedly deprived of mana in the masterless world somehow acquired it. It later became known that Mom appeared in this world at the same time as the incident that was called the Cataclysm. Therefore, the first fragment decided to wait for the rest, and now successfully absorbed the second. Such unpleasant changes will occur just in the midst of the war, but no other problems should interfere with the plan. And now the Apostle needs to understand how strong the so-called hunters who possess mana are. This must be done in order to fulfill one's mission as a fragment of Thiel. And while the boy was standing in the middle of the airport, a deafening explosion was heard, which caused people to panic. The stunned citizens noticed goblins and orcs who broke through the wall, sensing prey. Everyone realized that there had been a dungeon breach, and someone had to contact the Hunters Association quickly. When a monster with a huge amount of mana goes on a rampage, a high-ranking hunter comes. The Apostle wanted to see the S-ranker's skills when he suddenly noticed the approaching hunters. Both used Stardust, but due to the small amount of it in their systems, it had no effect. However, if Thiel's ability is used to strengthen this belief, they will immediately become under his control. The Apostle ordered them to leave immediately because they were only getting in the way, and they immediately carried out the order. Meanwhile, the monsters caught up with the people who did not have time to escape, mercilessly taking their lives. The barely alive girl extended her hand towards the boy, begging for help, but he ignored her. The creation exists for the Creator, so the only reason to live is to fulfill the will of God. However, for some reason, people had their own desires perhaps, but were not given the desires that are inherent to the Creator. He couldn't believe that such weak people were superior to them. At this time, a guy running past looked at the calm boy in shock. At that very moment, Suho, who had just returned to Korea, appeared, and something similar had already happened. The orc, who wanted to crush the man, immediately received a direct blow from the hunter, who arrived in time. Now he could hold off the monsters alone, so he asked the survivors to get out quickly. The Apostle noticed a guy who easily dealt with all the monsters that came his way. The boy immediately recognized the hunter in the black mask whom Min Song had told him about earlier. It was he who had destroyed the hyenas. It turns out that this guy is the problem that tried to interfere with their great plans. Suho ignored the boy, continuing to fight the monsters that were now posing a great threat. The Hunters Association could not allow the dungeon to break through at the gate, where there could be many casualties. However, he decided to think about this later, because first he needed to get the surviving people out of here. The Apostle felt that this hunter did not use Stardust, and his strength was on par with Min Sung or even higher. At that very moment, Suho raised the slain goblins from the shadows, ordering them to help the people who could not get out on their own. The Apostle's eyes immediately widened in shock when he recognized the ability this guy possessed. It was the same power that the darkness uses. It is not difficult to believe that there is a person who can use this power. If he really is connected to the darkness, it becomes clear why he needed to attack the Hyena Guild and the Stardust Factory. Then he decided to hide from sight for a while, because he could not let him know about their presence in this world. While the boy was thinking about this, he didn't notice how a huge Kamaz truck flew towards him, threatening to blow up the airport. As soon as the explosion thundered, the Apostle turned around, noticing a hunter in a black mask behind him. Suho covered him with his body so that the explosion would not cause him any injuries, because he thought that he was an ordinary boy. However, now all his attention was riveted to a huge monster that was looking at him in surprise. Bear said that he felt the energy of the Idarims in him, and the guy suggested that they also had a hand in the breakthrough. Suddenly, the ant seemed to see something, but he decided not to pay attention to it, while the Apostle looked at him intently. Deciding not to be distracted, Suho invested all the points for reaching level 35 into strength, increasing it to 77. The next second, his fist and the monster's fist collided, causing a shockwave. The Apostle was surprised that the hunter saved him, because to him he looked like an ordinary human child. Even though he uses the powers of darkness, he is terribly weak compared to the darkness itself, which does not make him a serious opponent. However, right now, it is not possible to assess his potential, because there is a feeling that he can become even stronger. The Apostle was very lucky to meet him, so he decided to get rid of him as soon as possible. Suddenly, another hunter came to the airport who used fire magic and decided to finish it quickly. The Apostle turned around in surprise, noticing clots of flame that began to gather directly above them. The next second, fireballs began to fall on all the monsters, burning them to ashes. Suho was surprised by the fireball that appeared out of nowhere and started attacking the monsters. This man had killed so many monsters at once that his strength definitely made people respect him. However, the boy knew only one hunter who could control fire and wield such power. This was S-rank hunter Choi Jong-in, who was acting as calm as possible right now. The man was emotionlessly surprised that his boss had managed to survive, praising him for his strength. After that, he began to create a fiery bow, pulling it towards the muzzle of a huge monster. The boss growled loudly, wanting to absorb the arrow that was flying towards him, but in doing so, he only brought trouble upon himself. The fire arrow passed through, destroying it, and now the situation with the breakthrough was settled. The surviving people immediately began to greet humanity's most powerful weapon with smiles and gratitude. Suddenly, the man began to turn around, because he seemed to see the guy who had fought here before he arrived. It was strange that he left without receiving his honors, but Suho decided to hide on purpose so as not to be discovered. Moreover, the apostle always acted secretly so that no one would know, but now she decided to attack civilians in such a place. It was obvious that something was being planned, and now the apostle was beginning to emerge little by little from his hiding place. Later in the evening, the apostle was in Min-sun's house, silently looking out the window, thinking about today's incident. Suddenly, a portal opened behind him, from which a third fragment arrived, to whom he decided to report on the situation. This world was not as primitive as they expected, which introduced many new inputs into their plan. Among humans, there are those who possess mana, and among them, there are S-ranked ones who possess enormous magical power. There was also a variable that needed to be gotten rid of, but the energy clot did not want to listen to the continuation. The fragment decided to look through the memories after taking over the body, since it had already done everything that was required. The apostle was surprisingly sad that he would disappear without a trace when the new personality took over. But nothing can be done in the end. Fulfilling the will of the creator is their main priority. All this was done for the sake of the great palace, so the boy immediately began to unite with the third fragment. When he did this, an adult guy appeared in his place, who instantly looked through all the memories. He didn't expect to see a creature that had the same ability as the darkness they were fighting. However, the second fragment's remark was fundamentally wrong, and he decided not to get rid of it. Because if they turn him into a follower, they will be able to subjugate even the dead. When Suho got home, Bear noticed that he looked too tired, which was too obvious. Before he got home, his uncle caught him and continued his instructions for what seemed like an eternity. He was glad that the boy wanted to protect the land, but his safety had to come first. However, the boy hoped that his mom and dad would worry about him as much as Jinho did. Then he decided to go to the Dungeon of Shadows, because he could rest later. The guy was so busy today that he didn't have time to complete his daily task, and he can't miss out on today's reward. But when Suho found himself in the Shadow Dungeon, shock from what had happened was written on his face. The system indicated that all otherworldly creatures had been destroyed, and the daily quests were completed. As it turned out, Amit had exterminated all the goblins in the dungeon in one night, so that now there was not a single one left. He simply rid his dungeon of Tarnak's henchmen, whom he hated, and kept his promise not to kill people. However, the boy was upset, because if there were no more daily tasks, his growth would immediately slow down. Suddenly, the monster offered him his help in making him stronger, which surprised him greatly. Initially, he wasn't that strong either. He just knows a good way to achieve good results. And at that very moment, a new daily task appeared, which Suho decided to accept without hesitation. The list consisted of 100 push-ups, abdominal exercises, squats, and a 10-kilometer run. The guy was surprised by such a weak method, but the monster added that this would not be enough. Therefore, he will do all this while carrying it on his back, after which this clause appeared in the system. Suho couldn't imagine this, because with his current size, it would definitely be difficult for him. But because Tarnak regularly destroyed and restored it, over time he learned to control the physical state of his body. After just a couple of seconds, Amit became a little taller than Suho, and in this form it would be much easier for the guy. After that, they decided to start training, and the guy had already taken a push-up position hoping for a monster. But as soon as Amit landed on his back, the boy realized that only his size had changed, but not his weight. The rest of the company looked with concern at the gentleman, who could barely bear the weight of such a monster. The ground beneath him was completely destroyed, and he still needs to do 100 push-ups with that weight. It will be painful because he knows no other way to make progress except through destruction and rebuilding. Meanwhile, in the field-type dungeon near Paju, Min Seong was watching the flames being generated. Also with him was a monster with tentacles on its face, who convinced the man to consider his contribution to this an honor. The demon Murmu, who was the manager of the Stardust factory, reminded that the apostle had saved them both from a disgusting life. Instead of answering, the man swung his blade, cutting off several of the monster's tentacles, but it did not cause him pain. Min Seong was indignant that the demon dared to evaluate his life, considering it a threat. The man was interested in the apostle's whereabouts, as Tae-gyu, whom he had promised to get rid of, would soon return. At that very moment, the demon handed him a golden stone, asking why he did not use it. The apostle was his savior, who appeared to him after the demon world was destroyed by the Lord of Shadows. He himself was banished to a rift between dimensions. The apostle improved the poison of mad blood and created Stardust. Only thanks to this, they were able to destroy the traitorous Radier family, who did not want to give up until the very end. If Min Seong serves him, he will definitely become stronger than he is now and will definitely be able to defeat Tae-gyu. Throwing away his cigarette, the man replied that the demon knew nothing about S-rank hunters. Then he asked him to stop talking sectarian nonsense, because he would not fall for it and would not use it. In response, the demon called him a fool, because that was why he always ended up losing. Min Seong needs to wait until the kid kills Tae-gyu and then report everything to the association. He was determined to put everything back in its place so that it could shine as brightly as it once did in the past. At that very moment, a girl standing at a decent distance was watching him, whom the man did not notice. She informed the president that Min Seong had just left the field-type dungeon in Paju. They were most likely mining Stardust in this place, so Hunter Miho needed to keep an eye on him. Jong-in, who was in the president's office, was surprised that they had already tracked down Min Seong. During the breach of the underground near the airport, all the association employees monitoring the gate simultaneously lost their memory. It turned out that they were taking Stardust, and suspicious actions of hunters are manifested in different places. Now that they have enough evidence, the association will officially ban Stardust. And now, they need to catch Min Seong and all those behind the production and distribution of Stardust. Adjusting his glasses, Jong-in declared that their hunters would help them with this matter for the good of humanity. Jin Chul remembered that Yu Jin had recently contacted him and told him that Su-ho had returned safely. If this guy can also level up, they will try to recruit him into the guild, just like his father in his past life. At the same time, Su-ho was writhing in tension and pain, counting his 99th push-up. When the 100th happened, his arms gave out and his muscles and skin tore, bleeding profusely. Amit, looking at this, continued to sit calmly on his back without trying to help his master in any way. The monster was surprised that the Lord ran out of steam at this point, and the others noticed in shock that both of his arms were broken. While Bear was raging at Amit, forcing him to stop training, the guy, with his last breath, opened the store. His comrades immediately froze and stopped their bickering, turning their attention to him in surprise. After draining the health potion, he thought that it was for the best, since he just wanted to become stronger to fight Min Seong. With 3 more missions left to complete, Su-ho was determined to continue his rigorous training. When Su-ho started doing abs, he decided to team up with Rocky to make things a little easier for himself. After each exercise, he increased the number of health potions he drank, but this did not always help. After just 2 exercises, there were countless empty jars lying on the ground. Amit didn't imagine that this guy would be able to withstand the training, even with the use of abilities. The young ruler will never give up, will always find a way out of any situation, and will someday surpass Tarnak. When the exercises were over, Rocky, who had left Su-ho's body, was unable to even stand on his paws. The guy himself was so exhausted that he ignored the notification about receiving a reward for the quest. This was the end of today's training, but the guy didn't even have the strength to move his arms. The training was hellish, but thanks to it and the reward for the quest, he pumped up his endurance skill and strength by 1. It's unclear if this is helpful, but it will definitely become stronger if the daily quest is made easier. So he gave Amit a thumbs up and suggested that they continue in the same spirit tomorrow, which satisfied the monster. When Su-ho got home, he fell asleep exhausted, and Bear carefully covered him with a blanket. Su-ho fell asleep immediately while the ant was praising him for the great work he had done today. But now, since I had a free minute, it was time to watch a little TV, which Baru liked so much. The news reported that the association announced the creation of regulations for field-type dungeons. The association will take immediate action against the Reaper Guild and other guilds that own field dungeons. The next day, Min Seong carefully studied the document that the people from the associations had given him. Since his guild owns too many field-type dungeons, they can't ignore it. The higher-ups ordered the clearing of the guild and Reaper's B-rank dungeon in the Paju region. It's also been more than 6 months since he last went hunting, so he's obligated to take part in the raid to renew his hunting license. The man was sure that Jin Chul was trying to put a spoke in his wheel because that was where the largest factory was located. He should have refused, even if it meant running afoul of the association, but his colleague decided to grant their request. The workers immediately thanked the guild leader for his consent, as this made their work easier. It seemed obvious to Tae-gyu that they would obey the association's demands without fail. Min Sung realized that he had returned so suddenly from his overseas business trip to interfere with his plans. The association would be sending its hunters to raid Paju, so the Reapers Guild had to form a joint squad with them. After the guests left, Min Sung immediately began asking if the leader understood how expensive field-type dungeons were. However, Tae-gyu was certain that the association's goal was different from getting rid of the dungeon and field types. Most likely, they found out about his secret, and he said that their competence should not be underestimated. Not only did he disregard his advice, but he also dared to use the guild members at his own discretion in his absence. The boss got angry, asked if Min Sung thinks that he is still his driver, cleaning up all the dirt after him. At that very moment, a recruiter wrote to Tae-gyu and said that a new S-rank hunter had appeared in Korea. He decided to go and pay a personal visit to the association, asking them to prepare a contract for hiring a new hunter for him. In the end, he added that the situation could still be corrected and everything possible must be done to restore order here. Min Sung was furious that the idiots who were lucky enough to become S-rank were always acting like they were some kind of idiot. But he couldn't wait for this alien child to grow up, because the new fragment was supposed to appear by now. While he was thinking about killing Tae-gyu, his phone turned on, and when he looked at the screen, an ominous smile appeared on his face. On the screen was a grown-up apostle who was now in the association and was clearly up to something. Meanwhile, reporters watched from the sidelines, discussing the emergence of a new S-rank in Korea. Everyone was overjoyed and eager to interview him to find out which guild he wanted to join. At that very moment, a man in a white suit came out to congratulate the new S-rank, Park Do-jin. It turned out to be Choi Jong-in, who was the head of the Hunters Guild and attracted admiring glances. The man had a feeling that they had met before, but the guy saw it in the fact that this had never happened. Getting straight to the point, Jong-in decided to invite him to join the Hunters Guild, for which he had already received gratitude. Suddenly, the apostle waved his hand sharply and announced that he had already chosen a guild so it wouldn't work. The guy pointed to the car from which Tae-gyu had just gotten out, almost missing an important meeting. A week later, a raiding party was formed to raid the Paju Field Dungeon, consisting of a guild and an association. Baek Min-ho, an A-rank hunter, was here at the request of the association to help clear the dungeon. Min Seong, who also participated in the raid, thanked her for her help, noting that the field dungeons were causing them trouble. The girl realized that it was all just acting, but she tried to act casually, as if she didn't know anything about it. This man skillfully hides his inner rot with an outward kindness, but everything that happens in Paju will be revealed today. Min-ho wanted to tear off his mask with her own hands to bring him to justice for all his crimes. However, an unexpected change was the new S-rank hunter who joined the Reaper Guild, Park Do-jin. If something were to happen, she had something that would help her detain Min Sung no matter what. As the strike force moved forward, a squad of miners followed behind them, each of whom took up a tool. But the most unexpected thing was that Soo-ho also ended up in the mining squad, and he couldn't miss this opportunity. A few days ago, Min Sung met the apostle again, noticing that he had matured again since their last meeting. He chose a younger body to make his initial survival easier, but he no longer needed it as he had collected enough fragments. However, the man was more interested in the name Do-jin, which he never used, and decided that the boy wanted to become a hunter. But this was just a name for public presentation, because becoming a hunter, he would be able to afford to do business outside. Because of the incident he caused at the airport, the Hunters Association followed Min Sung Woo and blamed him. And if the association uncovers the factory in the Paju area, things could end badly for them. The apostle asked him not to worry because he had joined the Reapers Guild precisely to prevent this. He will turn all the hunters who go on the raid into his own, and once that happens, they will not be able to find anything. It was a strong move from the start, but he still needed to deal with Tae-gyu in his current state. The guy remembered his promise, and after meeting him, he was confident that he could emerge victorious. However, Min Seong didn't care even if they both died. He just wanted the apostle to keep his word. Today, Jin Chul sat in his office thinking about how the raid in Paju was about to begin. However, he also cannot sit idle because he needs to find convincing evidence about Min Sung and Stardust. There seems to be nothing to worry about, considering the hunters who are participating in the raid. They were supported by the White Tiger, who provided Min Ho. If something unexpected happens, they have Choi Jong-in and another S-rank hunter in reserve. But that new guy Dojin didn't inspire confidence, and no one could know what was on his mind. He joined the Reaper Guild at the start of the raid, and it's easy to think that everything will work out in Min Sun's favor. However, the oddities don't end there, as Suho joined them as part of a mining team. Whether it was coincidence or fate, he personally approved of his participation in the detachment, but he doubts the correctness of this decision. If this is all part of his plan, then we need to help him, but we also shouldn't forget about the safety of Jinwoo's son. Meanwhile, the strike force had already encountered fire-breathing lizard monsters, creating additional problems. The tank, which was sweating heavily from the heat of the flames, shouted to its comrades that at this rate, it would not last long. But at that very second, Min Ho came to his aid and knocked out the monster with her bare hands. The lizard tried to catch her, but she was too fast and playful. Bouncing off the monster's body, she leaned against the wall to push off of it and gain speed, destroying the lizard with one blow. A couple of minutes later, the huntress stood between the bodies of two defeated monsters, which she dealt with single-handedly. Her gaze fell on Min Sung, who hadn't even moved a finger, and she felt sorry for him waking up as an A-rank. While she was thinking that being a hunter was a joke for him, she didn't notice how a monster jumped on her from behind. Min Ho turned around too late and wouldn't have had time to dodge, but Dojin suddenly came to her aid. The girl was shocked by his calmness until he advised her to be more careful in the future. He knocked out a salamander with one blow, came to the raid in casual clothes, and initially seemed like a simple child to her, despite his S-rank. S-ranked ones were on a completely different level, which is why the guy decapitated new monsters with light movements of his hand. After a couple of minutes, they finished clearing the area, and they did it sooner than expected. However, Min Ho felt that there were too few monsters here, which Min Sung actively agreed with. They conduct regular population control of monsters in field dungeons, so they do not pose a threat. Usually, guilds don't care about this since there is no need to enter the dungeon every day, which confused the girl. She was sure that something strange was definitely going on here, and Min Sung pointed the way to the boss's room. He didn't care how hard she tried to sniff something out here, because they wouldn't be able to find anything incriminating. The demons should have already demolished the factory and disappeared into the field dungeon, leaving no evidence behind. So she will never find any trace of her, and will not get out of here in her right mind, no matter how much she wishes otherwise. Meanwhile, the three demons were just finishing their preparations, having gathered a small group of weak-willed people. They were very sorry that they could not go to the apostle who was so close to them. During this time, they will not be able to collect much stardust because the firewood is currently not coping with its task. At the same time, Suho stood in front of the door where, as Burr stated, the presence of demons could be felt. Without thinking twice, the guy opened the doors, finding inside a trio of demons and people who looked like zombies. The stunned demon looked in his direction, but didn't have time to say anything, as he received a blow to the face. The monster flew several meters, which stunned its fellow monsters, who did not understand what was happening there. Suho was in full battle readiness, preparing himself for battle to the maximum, wanting to stop the demons. Now Burr was observing the results of the young master's training, who had cut off the head of this monster for nothing. Everyone else was unconscious. As expected, there was also a stardust factory in Paju. The demon, who seemed to have been destroyed, did not think that the enemy of the apostle's great deeds would burst in here. The next second, he was fully restored, slightly larger in size, and declared that he would be an excellent gift for the apostle. The miners were surprised by the huge number of crystals because the dungeon is under the control of the guild. They also couldn't believe that the guild allowed an E-rank to enter this dungeon, even though he was still very young. But it was the boss who assigned the newcomer to work at the entrance to the dungeon, where it was safe, while he sent them to the front lines. It looks like his cart can carry 4 times the normal amount, so they'll help him out as soon as they're done here. Meanwhile, Suho stood in front of the 3 demons who were surprised by the intruder. Beer wanted to say something to the master, but he interrupted him because with the increase in the level of perception, he also felt it. The demon standing before him was at the level of an A-rank hunter, like Randolph from the pyramid. The association must have some reason to send a guild member to clear a field-type dungeon, so he joined the gathering squad. Perhaps they found out about the stardust and became interested in Min Sung. Then it would be more difficult for him to get information. He asked the demon where the apostle was now, but he was hunting him just as the apostle was hunting the guy. The monster promised that they would meet soon, but first he would break all his bones and deprive him of oxygen. The guy couldn't escape the strong embrace of his tentacles that enveloped his body, but he didn't show it. He remembered how he was able to complete Amit's brutal training on his own in just 5 days. His body definitely became stronger, and the loads he could withstand increased several times. When the training came to an end, the happy guy simply fell to the ground, spreading his arms out to the sides. Putting all the points he got from the dailies into strength was a good decision. And he also got a skill that increased strength. At that time, Amit was absolutely sure that he was the strongest person he had ever seen. With these thoughts, the guy easily broke free from the tentacles, which seemed to have become a prison for him. His strength was now at 120, so he was confident in his abilities and charged straight at the demons. Coming close to one of them, he decided to ask again where the Apostle Itaramov was, thereby stunning the monster. Instead of answering, the demon decided to strike him, swinging several tentacles that merged together. However, Suho completely ignored this attempt, grabbing the demon's head and then easily tearing it out. After that, he used Storm Slash to inflict as much damage on him as possible. The demon felt an incredibly frightening aura, which he had only seen once, and the guy decided to find out everything without his participation. Suho tossed his head up for Bear to eat, while the demon regretted not being able to watch the picture the apostle was painting. But thanks to his help, they were able to destroy the Radier clan. At least this warmed his soul in the last seconds of his life. Somewhere in the shadowy dungeon, Isel tried to understand what had happened, because her body suddenly felt lighter. Meanwhile, a satisfied Beer enjoyed his meal. Although the octopus was a little difficult to chew, it was no less tasty. Suho decided to quickly find out something about the apostle, but he had to wait until the ant finished chewing. As it turned out, there was a bright light in the eyes of this demon, but the apostle of Itarim was unable to find out any details. They are at a dead end again, and only Min Sung, the one responsible for producing Stardust, remains. But first, the guy had to get the people out of here, because this battle could affect other hunters as well. Dojin was surprised when he stopped feeling the presence of demons, assuming that the association had something to do with it. After a couple of minutes, they reached the field dungeon boss room and stopped near a huge gate. Minho still hadn't found a single clue, even though they were supposed to be producing Stardust together. Minsung was pleased when he looked at her, because the girl was genuinely surprised that it was absolutely clean here. He whispered to Dojin to cancel the brainwashing plan, as it would be better if everything ended without problems. However, the apostle didn't think so, while Minho decided to check everything again, but after killing the boss. As the girl directed everyone forward, she didn't notice that Min Sung's face turned pale when he heard the apostle's words. The frightened man asked what he was doing, to which the guy replied that he had spoken about this earlier. He's going to turn every hunter here into a follower, and he's going to start with him right now. They can only take valuable allies, work with A rank within the S rank radius, a crazy idea from the very beginning. So he decided to use it to get close to Taegyu, which made the man shudder in horror. After hearing the talk about S rank, Min Sung became extremely angry because he was sure that no one could brainwash him. But when he turned around, he realized that he was in some kind of space, and his mind was forced to listen to the will of the Almighty. Dojin walked past the hypnotized hunter, deciding that he could now move on to his next target. Meanwhile, Chong In, sitting in the car, said that if the summoned creature disappears, it means the team is in trouble. The summoning will help them control the situation, and they were able to solve the problem of not being able to use devices inside the dungeons. It was a great idea, but the man hoped that they wouldn't have to interfere and that everything would go without any problems. Looking at Taegyu, who was dressed in a hunter's uniform, Jung-in thought he was worried that Min Sung would do something bad. However, the man was relatively calm and simply waited for something to go wrong. Taegyu guessed that Jong-in was jealous that an S-rank hunter chose to join the Reaper Guild. However, the interlocutor began to deny this, because they already had enough very talented hunters without him. The head couldn't believe that Min Sung was responsible for distributing an unknown stimulant, and he, as the head, should be held accountable for it. If something really happened, he had to keep his promise and let Jung-in sort it out on his own. At this time, the strike force was fighting a huge salamander, which was the boss of this dungeon. Min Ho noticed that the S rank stood aside and left all the work to others, even though they were his seniors. Moreover, from the moment they entered the boss's room, Min Sung suddenly started fighting with all his might. The apostle was confident that the star fragment he gave to Min Sung could give even an A-rank hunter an advantage. The man practically single-handedly inflicted significant damage on him without exposing himself to the blow. However, the monster timed it right to catch the man, after which it turned sharply, waving its huge paw. It was a blow of incredible force, but Min Song managed to put her sword in front of her to defend herself, thereby avoiding damage. It seems like it's hard for an A-rank hunter to fight at S-rank level with just the star fragment effect. He then decided to use one of the 5 abilities of Teal's shards, which increased the characteristics of unique traits. She could even strengthen the faith of the flame creatures stored in Stardust, even the unique features of weapons. She has the power to increase the magical power of the hunter Min Seong, as well as the unique feature of the weapon he wields. Now the apostle wanted to see if his subordinate, after acquiring and strengthening, would be able to obtain the desired S-rank power. At this time, the boss saw that the man was standing motionless, which is why he decided to deliver the final blow. But as soon as the monster approached him, Min Sung abruptly turned towards it and used a slashing skill. The blow was so strong that even Tae-gyu and Jong-in noticed it and immediately turned their gaze to that place. Min-ho looked in shock from the man to the hole in the ceiling that he had managed to make. It's difficult to estimate the level of fatigue that occurs after applying the enhancement, but Min Sung was able to briefly reach S-rank. However, most of the power increase has already disappeared, indicating that it is not suitable for S-rank power. The hunters watched the situation in shock, realizing that such an attack could not have been carried out by an A-rank hunter. Stardust was ineffective for high-ranking hunters, which hinted to them that there was another mana booster out there. While everyone was trying to process this information, something happened that no one could have expected. Min Sung pierced Dojin's body with a sword. Smiling madly, the man declared that someone like him could not brainwash him. However, he will use his cursed power for good, but then he will no longer be able to see anything like this. As he pulled out his sword, the hunter's body fell lifelessly to the ground, while the other hunters began to back away. Min-ho couldn't believe that he would attack an ally and was most likely driven crazy by his doping. But Min Sung didn't listen to her, covering his face with his hand as the voices in his head wouldn't stop. Since there were S-rank hunters waiting outside by order of the association, if he didn't hurry, he wouldn't get out at all. As soon as he decided to run away, Min-ho gave everyone the order not to let him leave. The man rushed forward, demanding that everyone get out of the way, after which he began to forcibly push them aside, hoping to escape. They couldn't stop him for even a minute, and besides that, they received quite serious injuries. Lee Cheol immediately perked up to signal the S-rank hunters outside as quickly as possible. The girl's eyes widened again as she turned her head and discovered that Dojin was still alive. The apostle was surprised that a strong-spirited man was able to cope with the divine power of generating flame. Min-ho tried to find out how he was able to survive since his heart was pierced with a blade before her eyes. Meanwhile, Min Sung was running at full speed. Even though he had achieved S-rank, he was now forced to run away with his tail between his legs. But now he has no one to rely on, neither the damn alien, nor the association, nor the guild. His first decision was to take refuge in a nearby town. But at that very moment, a blade appeared before his feet, forcing him to stop. A guy who heard the explosion but could not imagine that it would come to him, began to emerge from behind the tree. Suho immediately stated that he needed all the information from him about Stardust and the Apostle of Itarim. Not only does he know about Stardust, he also knows about the existence of the alien Apostle. Come to think of it, he had been informed that the man who had defeated Brokey without disrupting the supply of material was wearing a black mask. However, the man was only worried that if he lingered here, the hunters would soon catch up with him. Judging by the guy's magical power, he was no match for him. So Min Sung suddenly rushed forward, pointing his sword at him. Reacting instantly, Suho grabbed the blade with his gloved hand, pushing it aside. Min Sung couldn't pull out his sword as the boy swung his leg sharply, hitting him on the chin. The man did not understand how this was possible because he had much less magical power than he did. Beer noticed his surprise. Veteran hunters are determined only by the amount of mana they possess. But the ant could sense true power, and thanks to Amit's training, the Lord developed his strength to the maximum. And now he could easily compete with an A-rank hunter because the latter was not able to cope with his physical abilities. Meanwhile, Min-ho continued to question Dojin about how he managed to survive. And just as the apostle wanted to subjugate her mind to himself, someone suddenly called out to her, thereby interfering with the guy's plans. The girl greeted the two S-rank hunters with a smile, who arrived immediately after noticing the explosion. The dissatisfied apostle watched them, but was confident that they would not be able to interfere with his plans for much longer. Min Ho immediately reported that this was the work of Min Sun, and that he had acquired this ability from somewhere. It emitted a colossal amount of mana, as if a simulator was being used, and also attacked the hunter Dojin. Despite the wounds he received, the hunter looked quite normal, although it was clear that he had been pierced in the chest. The apostle parried this with a smile, explaining that he had the skill of healing, and that was why he was able to survive. Jung In was interested in the skill, which was quite high level, but Min Ho advised them to quickly catch up with Min Sung. At this rate, he would reach the city and disappear, so Jong In reminded Taegyu of the promise he made. But when he turned around, he did not notice his comrade behind him, realizing that he had decided to deal with him alone. The apostle still felt a connection with Min Sung, and was still amazed that he was able to stand firm in his faith. It is unlikely that anyone will believe his words, but if nothing is done, they may begin to suspect him. I'll have to get rid of him, even if it takes a lot of holy power, but it will take control of his body and force him to commit suicide. He could always get another A-rank hunter, but as soon as he looked into Min Sung's eyes, he was surprised that he was already fighting. At first, he assumed that the man had stumbled upon an S-rank hunter, but he immediately recognized the guy in the black mask. He couldn't understand what he was doing here, assuming that he, like the association, was also pursuing Min Sung. In this world, everything always goes wrong, even though everything used to happen according to God's word. But something inside him made the apostle smile. Perhaps it was the anticipation of the unknown. Meanwhile, Suho continued to press his opponent, who could not allow him to delay him any longer. Suddenly, the man stopped him loudly, surprising the guy who was just getting a taste for battle. Min Sung decided to ask him if he would let him go if he answered his questions, which made Suho doubt the offer. The guy knew that they were the same apostles, but the embittered man explained that this degenerate had betrayed him. After learning that something had gone wrong between them, Suho asked him why he was helping him spread stardust. The thing was that he promised to kill someone, although from the outside such a serious deal looked very ridiculous. After the Great Cataclysm, his whole life went down the drain, and the one who was previously a nobody became an S-rank hunter. And now he began to look down on him, but in order for him to continue living his life, he must die. The guy wanted to kill the alien, but Suho was sure that words would be enough. Min Sung was surprised that the guy didn't want to kill him, even though he wanted to take over their world. It reminded him of the most vile characters he had ever played, promising but lacking personality. He's so kind. He lives within the moral framework imposed by society, but he himself doesn't understand what he wants. After all, if he hadn't received his power by pure chance, he would have forever remained a secondary character. However, he will find himself in a situation where he will have to make a fateful decision, and he will arrange it for him. At that very moment, Min Sung found himself in the hands of the apostle, who forbade him to say anything. However, he was grateful because with his help he achieved a lot, and he takes back his words about his incompetence. Deciding to use it one last time, the apostle clapped his hands, thereby destroying the man's personality. At that very moment, Min Sung's body began to glow incredibly brightly, emitting a strange energy. It was the power of Itarim, incomparable to that of Broca, surpassing it by far. Suho watched in amazement as the man began to metamorphose into another being. The angel who appeared in front of him said that the attack on the dust factory, the search for Min Sung, all for the sake of meeting him. The apostle who now possessed Min Sung's body was sure that they were similar in this regard to the saboteur in the black mask. Min Sung's appearance suddenly changed, and given his words, it could be concluded that the person in front of Suho was an apostle. The angel was not surprised that he knew of their existence, as well as of the gods who had sent them here. Pointing his sword at the guy, the apostle smugly added that he had come to claim their rights to this world. Thinking that because of them, his father couldn't return, anger began to flare up inside Suho. The guy had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, which is why he rushed into the attack without further ado. But as soon as he took a step, someone's commanding voice stopped them, and everything around shook from the raging energy. From this moment on, they are not allowed to move without his permission, and if they move, their body will be riddled with holes. Turning their heads, they didn't notice a man nearby who had already drawn his bow and aimed it at the apostle. Taegyu started asking Min Sung what was going on with him and what he had been doing all this time. The apostle ignored him, after which he concluded that they would not be able to talk here anymore, which surprised the guy. He suggested that they meet at the highest point in the region, after which he turned around, deciding to leave. However, Taegyu decided otherwise, forbidding him to move, after which he fired an arrow towards the apostle. The angel turned around sharply and let the arrow pass him by, dodging it with extraordinary ease. After that, he soared into the air, while the man prepared 3 more arrows to send after them. The apostle easily dodged each fired projectile, moving further and further away from the hunter. Meanwhile, Suho also tried to dodge every arrow that for some reason flew in his direction. Taegyu also came from Min Sung, and judging by his reaction, he has no relation to the apostle. Besides, he hadn't shown his true strength yet, as they were still able to dodge his arrows. But now, the most important thing for the hunter was to defeat Min Sun, and there was no need to think about the second hunter. He believed that it would be selfish of him to try to capture him unharmed, and so he decided to spare no effort. The apostle tensed up as he felt the dangerous magical power emanating from the S-rank hunter. Sensing something was wrong, the man turned around and pointed his bow at the goblin who was peeking out from behind the bushes. The man, in surprise, tried to pick up the commas where the goblin came from, after which he realized that it was a diversionary tactic. At that very moment, he decided to report everything to Jin Chul, who should have found out that Min Sung had disappeared. He apologized for his mistake. I assume that Min Sung's appearance was transformed under the influence of substances. He also noticed that there was a hunter in a black mask with him, but it is unknown whether they are allies or not. Jong-in, hearing this, decided to ask if this hunter was a hand-to-hand fighter, which surprised Taegyu. It was the hunter he saw at the airport. He was also wearing a black mask and was fighting alone with the black monsters. Jin Chul thought for a second that the missing Sung Jin Woo had returned, but he would quickly deal with them. Meanwhile, Suho appeared on the mountain where the apostle had called him, slowly approaching him. The first thing the angel was surprised about was that the guy decided to help him escape from a high-ranking hunter. But he was planning to escape, leaving Min Sung's body as soon as things got tough. The apostle heard from the demons that the darkness was a being known in this world as the Shadow Monarch, and he was curious about what connected him to it. He was too curious, and Suho wasn't going to support that, and would rather crush him once he got the information he needed. Beer warned him that after the apostle had taken over this body, he could not comprehend the extent of its power. The guy asked him not to worry because he had prepared something especially for such an occasion. The next second, he began to summon shadows, which appeared behind him in the blink of an eye. Looking at this picture again, the apostle was absolutely sure that he had observed the same power of darkness in the war. Now Suho summoned the most powerful monsters he had ever defeated to help him in the battle. These were all the strongest corpses he could save for this day, and now they were finally put to use. After this, he challenged the apostle to fight at full strength while teaming up with Rocky. Just a second ago, a new urgent quest appeared that required destroying the apostle and obtaining his memories. Suho met this quest with dignity because it seemed that it was fair to say that he would have to kill a man. Suddenly, the apostle felt a strange change with the awareness of his inner emotions. The fragment retains the main body's memories, and it seems to know what it is like to encounter darkness. Curiosity towards someone so strong, a powerful being who could single-handedly stop an army of other universes. He really wanted to find out about the darkness that was at the helm, and he was sure that the boy would be able to satisfy his curiosity. At that very second, a huge snake rushed at the apostle, deciding to strike first. Other monsters followed him, which the angel cut down with incredible ease. However, this was only a distraction, and when the shadows parted, Suho tried to strike his opponent in the forehead. The apostle realized that he was a close combat fighter, using the soldiers as bait, and attacked him himself. However, with a powerful swing of the sword, the angel instantly increased the distance from the guy. Meanwhile, Essil, who had waited for the right moment, decided to attack him from behind, gripping the spear more tightly. The apostle only needed to bow his head to parry the attack, after which he simply intercepted the spear. He noticed that she was not one of the black soldiers, and in that same second he realized that he had been distracted, having received a kick to the face from Suho. It didn't do much damage to him, but it made one wonder why he didn't use the Black Army. The guy decided to fix this, after which someone suddenly grabbed the apostle by the arms, not allowing him to move from the spot. It was the former pyramid boss who began to envelop the angel in sand, completely paralyzing him. While the apostle's body was covered in sand, Suho concentrated energy in his hand to attack. The enemy didn't even try to escape, deciding to take the guy's blow and test his strength. Stepping back, Suho was surprised to see that the sand holding him had exploded, which shouldn't have happened. The apostle decided that he could no longer experience their thrills, and then attacked the guy through the veil of dust. At the same second, the rest of the team, including the Shadow Army, also received damage. You were dark, like trained warriors, each with his own will, as if he were fighting a disciplined army. And his power resembles darkness only in appearance. One can safely say that they have completely different abilities. The guy had such power in his hands, but he wasn't even able to use it in battle, and he paid for it. After these men were possessed by the Apostle, he became much stronger, and his strength was at the S rank level. With these thoughts in mind, Suho discovered that the angel had decided to attack himself, wanting to destroy him. The Apostle said that he looked lonely because no one in this world could stand on equal terms with the darkness. No one could understand such a powerful entity, but Suho was surprised that his father was alone. As soon as he tried to block the Apostle's blow, the horn of Vulcan gloves immediately crumbled into small pieces. Looking at his hands in shock, the boy missed another blow, and this time the Apostle plunged the blade into his stomach. The Apostle was sure that his nature did not deserve such colossal powers, so he would take away the power of darkness that the boy possessed. He wants to convert him to his faith and direct his abilities for good, so that he can feel the feelings of darkness. Suho grabbed the blade, unable to believe that he did not deserve such power because it belonged to his father. Suddenly, the boy remembered that Min Song had told him something similar before turning into an apostle. He needed more than stats and abilities to become stronger. He had previously considered fighting more effectively by using shadow weapons. However, besides this, he uses many other skills, but Burr was confident that a genius like him could do anything. However, father never used shape-shifting, and there must be some good reason for that. But now, he began to think that he was too easily confining himself to the limits he had created for himself. The habit of compromising after failure, even after waking up, remained with him. And ever since he woke up, he had never painted a single picture, although he definitely enjoyed it, just as Min Sung had said. To rely on the system to meet his father and to become stronger to find his mother, these reasons were given to him by the system itself. Why did he spend all this time trying to follow in the footsteps of his father, who didn't need an exact copy? He needs to find what he can do, what only he can do. Only then will his true strength be revealed. Raising his hand, the boy gave the command to rise, which surprised the Apostle since he was mortally wounded by a blade. The angel reflected on the fact that the black soldiers were immortal due to their resurrection, which made them problematic opponents. But his warriors, even with such strength, are useless. But now something strange has begun to happen. The Apostle watched as the shadows began to merge with each other, but he had never seen anything like this, even in the war with darkness. At that very moment, a chimera appeared in front of the angel, while Rocky made the decision to separate from Suho's body. A black mask began to appear on the guy's face, and his eyes lit up because now he was ready to turn the tide of the battle. Suho remembered how, as a child, he said that he would be a policeman like his dad, because he was so cool. Or he had the option of becoming an athlete like his mother, which would allow him to run as fast as she did. Then he stroked his head and said that when he was born, mom and dad decided something. They will never influence his dreams and he can do whatever he wants. If this was his dream, he can strive for it, but he needs to ask himself more often whether this is really what he wants. He didn't know why his mother's words suddenly came to mind, but instead of asking questions, he just blindly followed his father's path. At university, Lim told him that drawing the same thing over and over again wouldn't improve his skills, but this time there were slight changes. People who focus on one theme tend to limit themselves, but the more he draws, the freer his execution becomes. This was especially true for the current painting, because what was depicted on the canvas could hardly even be called an ant. He probably got the shadow shape-shifting earlier because the system is adapting to his features. It was impossible to resist her any longer, and the fighting style that actively involved shadow changes gave him the idea to create a free shadow. Beer was surprised that the nearby shadow soldiers were drawn to the young master, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain his own form. Catching it in her hand, Asil began to question it about what was happening to it and the shadows around it. However, the ant did not even understand what happened to him specifically, but he had one theory. It appears that the young lord is awakening, having found where his true power lies. The apostle, looking at the unfolding picture, thought that there was hidden potential in him. This can cause problems. You need to bring him to a dying state as quickly as possible and use the star fragment. But just as he was about to do so, Suho released shadows from his body which forced the angel to retreat. The apostle couldn't understand what was happening, because he knew that hunters couldn't become stronger, after which he decided that the guy had reawakened. At this time, the wound from the blade on Suho's body began to quickly heal, leaving no scar. and its shadows became gloves. The boy began to wonder about the shadow shape-shifting, which can only turn shadows into weapons. Given the shadow's ability to transform, he can use them in a variety of ways. At this time, the apostle actively repelled the attacks of other shadows that were attacking him from all sides. A huge orc tried to attack him from behind, but the shadow soldiers posed no threat to him. Suddenly, he noticed a guy heading towards him who decided to use his last trump card. The system notified that a demonic strike had been activated, with which Ezel began to feed him. Suho suddenly jumped up and rushed straight towards the apostle, wanting to collide with him head-on. The magical power began to feel more dangerous, but the apostle could not ignore such an obvious attack. He began swinging the blade, leaving a series of deep wounds on the boy's body that were supposed to weaken him. The absence of one leg should not affect his strength, but he is still dangerous. Suddenly, Suho created a new shadow in front of him, and the apostle did not expect that something like this was possible with shadow shape-shifting. Taking advantage of his hesitation, the soldier dealt him a very serious blow, which shattered the rock into splinters with the angel's body. Du Jin, whose forehead started bleeding, couldn't expect the boy to pass on his ability to the soldier. It was a power he hadn't seen even in the darkness, which made him feel afraid for a second. Now he couldn't utter a word. It looked like Min Sung's jaw was broken. However, the body is still mobile. If he converts life force into mana, he will last a little longer. But at that very second, the apostle felt something was wrong, trying to understand what this brat had done to him. Perhaps the recent blow had cancelled the subjugation effect, causing Min Sung's sanity to begin to return. At that very moment, an internal dialogue arose between the apostle and the man, in which the latter declared that he was not afraid of death. He hated being looked down upon, but he hated being underestimated even more. If he can make life difficult for the jerks who look down on him, he will. He asked the boy to come over, because if he was not destined to become the main character, then he would play the role that was destined for him. When the effect of the subjugation began to finally wear off, Min Sung decided to end his career as a villain. At this time, Suho was purposefully walking towards him in order to end this battle in his favor. Min Sung didn't have time to react to the fist that the guy aimed at his chest where his heart was. It was enough to pierce the monster's body with his bare hands, causing it to writhe in pain. Min Sung's problem wasn't just the hole in his stomach. His broken jaw meant he couldn't even utter his last word. When the alien appeared before him, he thought he had the opportunity to change the world, but it all ended this way. Ever since the cataclysm, his life has been complete crap, and even on his deathbed he remembers Taegyu. He demanded that he not look down on him, because he was the superstar Lee Min-sungen. But when he raised his head, who noticed that the puppy's eyes that were looking at him were full of pity? When the man fell dead, the system notified the completion of the quest, awarding Suho experience and a level. At that very moment, his joyful comrades ran up to him and congratulated him on his victory over the apostle. However, the boy clearly realized that it was Min Song, not the apostle, who had the last laugh, and he was unable to talk to him. However, he seemed to him to be a man true to his principles, and now he was shocked by the murder of a man. Thanks to him, he realized something important, for which he was grateful to this man, even though he was his enemy. Having become a gambler, he found a goal: to find his mother and help his father, but he lost sight of his own meaning in life. That's why Min Sung called him a character who was completely devoid of personality, because he was always just trying to imitate. And then it dawned on him, fighting with his father at the end of his training, he revered him, and therefore could not win. But at the same time, the fierce desire to overcome him deepened the disappointment of defeat. Because his father felt so unattainable and unbelievable, he feels he must do something he never thought he could. Ultimately, it is commendable to be ambitious, but there is still a lot of work ahead. After which, Suho raised his index finger up and proudly declared that he wanted to become the strongest. His goal was to become stronger than the apostle of Itarim, the monarchs, and even surpass his own father. This was a new identity that he had chosen for himself, which caused his comrades to look at the gentleman with admiration. However, they replied that this goal was unattainable, since there was no one stronger than Sung Jin-woo, for which the guy thanked them. It was no surprise that they thought so, but now Suho decided to take a break and check the awards. Suddenly, the guy discovered that the system was offering him a quest to change his class upon reaching level 40. He looked over his characteristics with surprise and was glad that he would finally be able to gain a class. At this time, the apostle watched him from a distance of several kilometers, frozen in the air. Do Jin admitted that he had made a mistake this time, as he had never thought that the Black Mask had such potential. One of the abilities of the main body that he acquired by merging with the fragments is the scale of equal exchange. They allow him to exchange what he owned for something of the same value, which was a very dangerous weapon. Therefore, he will exchange the life force of the closest followers of the faith for mana. Everything was just as he expected, so he created an energy bow using the stone of subjugation instead of an arrow. At this time, Burr suggested searching Min-sun's memory for memories of the Apostle of Itarium. Suho thought about how after the cataclysm, this man hated the whole world, wanting to bring it back. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain. He was pierced by a stone sent by the Apostle, which got stuck inside his body. The guy didn't understand where the attack came from, because he didn't feel anyone's presence nearby. Meanwhile, the Apostle, who was quite far away, discovered that the goal had been achieved. As the stone began to activate, Suho let out a shrill scream and his shadows began to leave his body. At that very moment, there was a feeling as if something was penetrating his head, and the system was trying to eliminate the negative effect. The Apostle was sure that thanks to this, the power of darkness was already in their hands, because the system could not cope with it. However, to his surprise, the appeal stopped when the system, after another attempt, was able to dispel the negative effect. Suho was glad that longevity had turned on so timely, but now he needed to cover the wound with shadows. He had to do it, because his health points continued to drop incredibly quickly. Before the counter dropped to 1, he managed to accept something by clicking on the next notification. As it turned out, the guy accepted a quest to change his class, after which a portal opened in front of him. Only the player could enter the quest gate, and allies had to be sent to the Shadow Dungeon. During the movement, the boy did not see or hear anything, but because of the pain, he could understand that he was still alive. Suddenly, he saw a blue flame coming from a torch chained to the wall. At that very moment, Suho's eyes widened in fear as he recognized the place he was in, having been here before. At this time, the Apostle waited until everyone had disappeared, after which he landed near Min-sun's body. He didn't sense any mana nearby, and a portal that appeared out of nowhere took away the Black Mask and his soldiers. However, Min-song still remained here, which means that only his subjects can use the portals. Every time they meet, they do something out of the ordinary, which really interests him. Meanwhile, Suho decided to warm up a bit before starting the class assignment test. He noticed that upon arriving here, the hole in his stomach had healed, and the rest of his body was in perfect order. But the notification stated that the heirs of monarchs could not participate in the class change quest. He also couldn't use the Shadow Dungeon key, which greatly limited the guy's abilities. Then he raised his head, recognizing the place where he had been trained, but last time it all turned out to be a dream. It was a dungeon that his father had created especially for him, and the memories of those times were still with him. However, now he doesn't see any knights from whom he could gain experience, and he hasn't been given any weapons. Now he didn't even see the quest description, and now he needed to somehow get to the top of the tower without weapons and communication skills. Suddenly he noticed that this place now resembled a labyrinth. It looked familiar, but something was still wrong. Some places were all distorted, like the torches, which seemed to be glitching. At that very moment, he noticed with surprise the gates that were located not far from him. It's weird that the boss room was right in the middle of the hallway, as if the class change quest was done half-assed. Suho felt a sense of excitement, then sighed loudly and began to slowly open the gate. He thought that if he completed the quest, he could become as strong as he was then. During his training, he first encountered a knight who was an incredibly difficult opponent for the inexperienced Suho. It was pitch dark inside the room, but he felt that there was definitely someone there. When the guy came closer, shock appeared on his face, because he never expected to see something like this. Right in front of him, a guy stood up from the throne and headed towards him. It was Suho from training. The frightened boy couldn't believe that he had to fight his past self, but then he was able to defeat even Bera. At that very second, his double waved his hand, causing the earth to immediately begin to shake, quickly collapsing. Seeing that his opponent had lost his balance, the previous Suho immediately rushed into the attack, taking advantage of the moment. The stunned guy wanted to stop him, but it was too late, and the double literally destroyed him. At this time, one of the 3 torches went out, which meant that Suho had only 2 attempts left to pass. When the guy woke up, he jumped up suddenly, remembering the last moment before his terrible death. He woke up inside the boss room, which meant he had to defeat a version of himself from the past. Suho didn't know if it was possible, but if the system's goal was to make him stronger, then there definitely had to be a way. Unlike the tutorial, the dungeon has a lot of new passages, given the odd layout of the boss room. Wandering through the corridors, the guy noticed that there were other gates in the labyrinth, which he did not risk opening. Finding himself in front of the next set of doors, he stopped, discovering another boss room. Suho decided not to burden himself too much because whatever was there, it was certainly better than him from the past. Opening the doors, the boy was surprised to find children's toys scattered everywhere. In the middle of them sat a child who was also him, and now he was using telekinesis to lift one of the toys. Suho was scared when he saw the child's gaze, trying to understand what was going on in this dungeon. He couldn't believe that he would have to fight his child version because fighting a child is not fair. Suddenly, he felt that he couldn't move, and all the toys immediately flew into the air along with the child. When the boy died again, another torch went out, depriving Suho of another life. When he woke up, he immediately began to rub his neck, which the child had just broken with the power of the ruler. It was instant death, and with his current training, it was impossible to defeat any of them. Suddenly, he remembered that he had been given 3 lives during his training, and now he had already died twice. At first, he thought he had only 1 left, but then he discovered a huge wall covered with torches. Suddenly, the system threw an error, asking the player to defeat the entity on the other side of the gate before his allotted lives ran out. A system error occurred due to the material world being ingress, and he cannot leave the dungeon until he completes the quest. Looking up, Suho couldn't believe that all these torches were the number of lives he had been given to go through. But the problem is that in this place there is no way to increase the level, and everything will have to be done with the current forces. The reason he was given such an irrational task is closely related to a bug in the system. In this case, there is no guarantee that these lights represent the number of lives he has. However, now he cannot give up, because his only choice is to move forward. It was a new place, with passages that seemed random and boss rooms that appeared out of nowhere. There is a high probability that other boss rooms exist, and it is unknown how big this labyrinth is. The guy had a lot of time, so he could spend some of it searching and studying. Suddenly, he noticed the dark part of the corridor and felt someone's ominous presence. At that very second, toys began to appear from the darkness ahead, floating in the air, followed by a child. Suho couldn't understand what he was doing here. He probably went out into the corridor through the open door. However, now was not the time to think. He needed to run as fast as possible, but then something pierced his legs. Feeling incredible pain, the boy fell, noticing in front of him the toy dinosaur that had inflicted this damage on him. Suho was shocked to realize that his leg had been torn apart by an ordinary toy that looked extremely dangerous. However, all this happened only because, with the help of the ruler's power, she was able to gain such speed. With each passing second, it became more and more difficult to answer the question of how he was even capable of completing this quest. Suddenly, the guy felt that someone had come up from behind. Turning around, he saw himself from the first room. His last thought was that this was absurd, but the next second he was immediately attacked. After respawning, Suho was outraged that bosses wandering through the corridors was cheating, making the task more difficult. But if he is still alive, it means that all these many days represent the number of lives remaining. He doesn't need to fight them and needs to continue challenging them by finding a new room. However, no matter how many times he met his opponents, he was literally ground into dust in the shortest possible time. He died many times, but it was nothing, because at the moment he had an unlimited number of lives. If he continues to challenge endlessly, he will definitely find another door to the boss room. But it could also be that the other boss might not exist due to a system error, despite being immortal. There were enemies he couldn't defeat, and the inability to level up made this place feel like hell. Suddenly, the guy remembered his own words, which he told his comrades about wanting to become the strongest. These words became his chains that kept him moving, but now he needed to come up with a plan. Having bitten his finger, Suho decided to draw a labyrinth with his blood every time he found new passages. Now this could become the key to completing the quest, so he must do everything in his power. Meanwhile, the news reported that the association had banned Stardust because it affected hunters' memories. Hunters who used it are now undergoing tests to remove it from their systems. The vice leader of the Grim Reaper Guild, who was at the center of the Stardust spread, was found dead at the foot of the mountain. A former celebrity known as a hunting hero shocked the world when his crimes were exposed. Tae-gyu, who was the guild leader and was watching the news, said that it was entirely his fault. If he hadn't missed Min Sung back then, this wouldn't have happened, but he was asked not to blame himself. But the man added that there were still a few things that bothered him, as Min Sung's appearance did not match his own. Jong-in frowned, guessing that it might be a skill created using Stardust. Tae-gyu was angry that he couldn't answer this question with certainty, but he didn't deny such possibilities either. A hunter in a black mask was also seen fighting with him, and he was the one who killed Min-sung. Jong-in suddenly remembered that one of the miners who had joined the group had suddenly gone missing. He then took out a photo of Soo-ho, explaining that he was a D-rank hunter, but there was a possibility that this person was a false-rank hunter. Tae-gyu asked to take a closer look at his appearance, after which they handed him a photograph. Without wasting any time, the guild leader handed the photo to Hunter Do-jin, who was with them in the office. At this time, Jin Chul thought that there was a high probability that Soo-ho was the hunter in the black mask. But it was strange that he disappeared again, which caused the man to mentally ask Jin Woo what was happening to his son. At this time, Soo-ho was looking at the huge map of the labyrinth that he had drawn with his blood. Having carefully studied it, the guy slowly stood up, wanting to continue on his way because the quest was still far from complete.